If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 51, Chapter 50, Consequences of Bias. I am prepared to bear his hatred. Itachi Uchiha. As they walked through the lavishly decorated gate of the Shine clan, servants and subordinates of different stations and ranks bowed their heads fully whenever Yuruaki walked past them. Yuruaki had given Swaifon the slip to patch up any of Itachi's oblivious mistakes, but to her surprise it turned out that Itachi didn't need any help in blending into the crowd that was one of the 5 great noble houses that basically controlled and owned the Soul Society. As an extremely skilled stealth OP and warrior with a very good head on his shoulders, Yuruaki already classified Itachi as one of the most competent people she's ever known, and wasn't that a wild thought considering how long she's lived and all the titles she held, but she also knew that dealing with nobles, and not just any noble family but the Shine clan of Soul Society's principal clans, was a different ball game altogether. Even his deferential mannerisms to Yuruaki as his superior was on point that it amazed the 2 ladies he was accompanying. "I see you have quite the experience in dealing with nobles," she stated, quirking her lips humorously as she saw him gave the most imperceptible shrug that not even Swaifon standing besides him registered the slight twitch of his muscles. His body control is better than Swaifon's. Discovering more things about him makes me feel as if he was manufactured to near perfection rather than it being a genius-level talent. She groaned mentally upon realizing that she was doing it again. She was extremely analytical that it was almost at the border of unhealthy paranoia, except that it only happened when Itachi was nearby. Itachi was someone that she considered her equal when it came to his skill in espionage and everything stealth OP related. So to her, it was like trying to gain an upper hand against an equal at every chance she could. "Lady Yuruaki, are you visiting the young master before going to the meeting room?" Swaifon off to her side asked after they finally got away from the worshipping eyes of the servants and guards. Probably not. I'll meet him before we leave anyway." She chuckled at the adorable memories at her brother's utmost respect, obsessed devotion, for her. "Since he didn't barrel his way to us when we crossed the gates means that he's likely busy with the other guests. Then you should get ready, Lady Yuruaki. I'm sure you don't want to deal with the nuisance they'll cause you if all the other family heads arrived before you did." Swaifon gave her the reminder she always did whenever Yuruaki had a meeting with her fellow family heads. Just then 4 women appeared from the corner of the hall and followed Yuruaki into her room to get her ready. Swaifon and Itachi stood guard at the door in silence while waiting for Yuruaki to get ready. "You're curious, I can tell. What do you want to ask?" Unlike normally when he'd be more than content to remain and watch in silence, Itachi was the first to broach the shared silence. "Were you a noble's retainer when you were alive? You seem comfortably familiar with it," she asked reluctantly. Itachi was just as clueless as to why that question was important, but he answered regardless. "It's a bit complicated." To Swaifon's sharp memory, this was the first time he gave an answer that wasn't silence to any extremely personal question about his life. "How so?" Now she was genuinely curious. How complicated could it be that he preferred to ignore any question that broached the topic in any way? Itachi thought about the type of reply to give and soon came up with the most accurate example he could find. "To a vastly lesser degree, along with the exception of her frivolous habits, I was basically Yuruaki at one point in my life." Swaifon's retort had almost fired off when Yuruaki's name left his mouth, but she suddenly stopped and blinked owlishly at him as his words expanded in her head. "So that means, no wonder. If he's telling the truth then that would check most of the boxes, and also the silent understanding they both share." Her jealousy spiked for an inch moment, but she schooled her thoughts as most of Itachi's actions and attitudes started fitting themselves in perfect boxes that his little explanation provided. "I'm sorry to cut short the fun you two are having, but we have a meeting to attend. The guests are already waiting, let's go." Yuruaki stepped out of her room with the 4 women bowing behind her. She was delicately dressed in an extremely opulent white kimono with pure golden accents and embroidery beautifully decorated around its hems. She held a golden hand fan to her face with her purple hair neatly tied to the back and held in place with golden hairpins. Swaifon was already swooning with her cheeks dusted in a faint blush, something that never ceased to amaze Yuruaki, hence why she could never stop teasing Swaifon. Her spluttered reaction was just too adorable. She then turned to her newest companion, who still remained as stoic and rigid as the day she first met him. "Finally seeing something you can appreciate?" she asked with a smirk, needing no validation or gratification from anyone to know how stunning she looked, dolled up or not. "I'm hoping the overly opulent attire is a common between your noble families, or is this meeting not as simple as you made us think?" Itachi paid no mind to the question she asked but asked his in response, and her reply confirmed the bare minimum he needed to know. She looked at him with a smile that bore a blank feeling behind it. Sometimes it's better not to sate your curiosity, you know. Take it from me, if no one else. SwaFon looked between the both of them utterly lost, while the women still bowing behind Yoryuki started shivering despite anyone doing anything. Yoryuki sighed and started walking forward while beckoning with her finger for them to follow. You would have been executed instantly had this happened in any of the other noble houses, and I would have done the same had it been anybody else aside from you and SwaFon. I know. That's why I asked. Itachi simply replied. His words sounded annoying in the most patronizing way possible if anyone other than Yoryuki and SwaFon had heard it, like the maids following behind them who wisely said nothing, so all they managed was a twitch as they were aware of Itachi's literal speech pattern. You'd think a ninja like him can read the room and keep social cues. Yoryuki thought with an eye roll before slowly wiping away all emotions from her face as they got to the door of the meeting room, leaving her facial expression unfeelingly rigid. The door opened, revealing an indoor garden with a few people already seated within. Yoryuki left them to approach the other family heads, with Itachi and SwaFon standing a few feet away from the nobles. Head Shion, so good for you to join us. An old man dressed in pure white silk that Itachi remembered as Captain Kukaki of the 6th Division, greeted Yoryuki as she arrived in their circle before a translucent bubble covered them and muted every sound coming from the circle. The look and expression in their eyes and face, even the movement of their mouths, are not in synchrony. Itachi noticed that he couldn't focus on any of their facial features, and any time he tried, they were always different. Not an illusion, but it is most likely that the bubble blocks or scrambles any form of perception in its direction. He didn't bother entertaining the idea of using his Sharingan to understand what was actually going on, as doing something like that, and being found out like he expects to be, would have him facing execution before the end of the next minute. Off to another side of the garden were a few youngsters of clearly noble descent, possibly heirs, in their own circle, and a guard or two from the other noble families keeping the same distance as they were. Nobles. Itachi thought irritably. His bias towards Konoha's nobles made it hard for him to see another noble in a good light from the get-go. We might be here for a while. He heard SwaFon whisper beside him. His sole reason for accepting to go along with this charade upon Yoryuki's proposal was that he wanted to make his own initial impression of the head of the noble families, and if possible their heirs as well. When he first arrived in the Soul Society and heard of the noble families, he didn't put much of his attention on the noble families, but that quickly changed upon meeting Yoryuki, Captain Shion, and also Captain Kukaki and Captain Shiba, 3 noble heads who were also Shinigami captains. From there he learnt that the Central 46, which regulated the legislative, executive and judiciary systems of the Seireidii and all Shinigami in existence, affiliated or not, were also made up of members of the noble houses. And then there was the little tidbit of information across the few books that mentioned their general history and insinuated that they basically owned and controlled the afterlife, the entire realm that was Soul Society. These weren't the greedy, egotistical, political-minded but feebly weak old men that were the nobles in the elemental nations. These were century and millennium-old Shinigami with history spanning over thousands of years, along with the coalition of strength to back it up by boasting of a few captain-level Shinigami that were the retired old family heads. He knew this was his paranoia thinking to the extreme, but he couldn't deny that they were true. His own soul-searching that he struggled with, understanding the true nature of his Zanpakuto and being strong enough to wield them, and now topping it off with the bottomless trench that were the noble families that all too eagerly encouraged his paranoia to form a symbiotic relationship with his natural distrust and bias against noble clans. Barely 2 years in the afterlife, and it was already proving to be a lot more complicated than the entirety of 20 years of his life. Chapter 52, Chapter 51. Another question answered. Why is it that the Uchiha clan is known by all, and feared by all? Itachi Uchiha. The meeting lasted a few days, a bit too stretched out than what Itachi expected, but understandable as the essence of time was a little bit different to souls than it was for living beings. It was actually on the second day that the head of the Shiba clan, Kako Shiba, arrived. It wasn't hard to tell that she was a very free-spirited woman from the way she was dressed and the way she addressed the other clan heads. Shaggy black hair, green eyes, prosthetic arm, tattoos, a white skirt and a revealing low-cut red dress, she was the perfect picture of a delinquent, and that was exactly how she was. A quick glance at her and how the other clan heads reacted to her arrival made it clear to Itachi that she was the proverbial odd one out. Unlike Yoryuki, who could don any mask according to the occasion like the assassin she was, Kako was raw. Apart from the Shion, Shiba, and Kukaki families, the other two noble families were the Tsuneyashiro and the Kashomiji families. The head of the Tsuneyashiro family was a hunched old man that looked like a peer of the Shinigami head captain, even sporting a variation of the same old long beard. On the other hand, the head of the Kashomiji family was a rather middle-aged man sporting an equal ratio of black and grey hair, standing at the figurative middle between the younger-looking clan heads, Shine and Shiba, and the older-looking ones, Tsuneyashiro and Kukaki. From what he could silently get from Swafon, Itachi realized that maybe it was a lot more serious than he thought it was, as Swafon told him it was very rare for all clan heads to gather like this, something she had only witnessed twice. The next few days rolled past quite stationary for Itachi, who only moved a few times when the clan heads changed location. Damn fuckers! Couldn't they have said shit faster? Yoryuki yawned as she stretched her stiff muscles as they prepared to leave. She took a subtle glance at Itachi and rolled her eyes as she saw the curiosity in his eyes. There was no way she'd tell him what went on in these private meetings, and for his sake she hoped he didn't go snooping around. She knew ninjas and how inherently curious they were, especially those like Itachi. I need to meet a few people before she dodged the blur that tried tackling her from behind. I could practically feel your excitement from 100 meters. She told the blur, who happened to be a young boy. Ishir Shine had the physical look of an 11-year-old boy, short dark purple hair, and was the male carbon copy of Yoryuki. Big sister! He exclaimed and jumped to hug her, and this time she didn't dodge him. Ishir, seriously? You see me every other month? She said with a deadpan, making her brother chuckle more. Byakuya boyo, not going to attack me this time. She turned to the corner her brother came out of and saw Byakuya Kukaki, heir of the Kukaki clan, standing behind with a polite smile. Ishir wanted to surprise you, so I had to let him. He gestured at the young boy smilingly hugging her. And besides, I don't need such an underhanded method to face you. Itachi silently watched the two young heirs of their respective families, Ishir being an exuberant child and Byakuya being a bit haughty. Itachi could see the tiny hits of arrogance and pride in the young man's eyes and words. HOH! You've grown quite spunk since our last play session, Byakuya boyo. She said with a tempting grin, as she goaded him. How about it? This time I might even close my eyes. Byakuya's brows twitched and his annoyance grew upon seeing Yoryuki's mocking grin. As much as I'd love to, my grandfather is still waiting for me. Oh, pulling the grandfather card this soon? Looks like somebody is nervous. I'll guess I'll have to wait until you grow up to grow the right pair of balls to challenge me again. Itachi and Swafon watched as Byakuya's face exploded in red of equal parts embarrassment and anger. That's it, you crazy woman. The boy skillfully moved with shunpo towards Yoryuki, who didn't bother separating herself from her brother, who lazily dodged him before taking off down the hall, with Byakuya hot on her figurative tail. Young Master Byakuya often challenges Lady Yoryuki any chance he gets. He sees himself as her rival for some reason. Even without Swafon explaining herself, Itachi could understand why the boy was pissed off at Yoryuki. She teased him every time they came across each other. Let's go. Lady Yoryuki likes running rounds around him before disappearing and leaving him in anger. She said with a certain sympathy towards the poor Kukaki heir. Itachi said nothing, only simply disappearing before Swafon and arriving on one of the rooftops surrounding an open yard where Yoryuki was currently playing tag at the fuming Byakuya. In one of the buildings, he saw the old Kukaki head and 5th Division captain, Jinrei Kukaki, watching the play below before he turned towards Itachi. The two stared for a second before nodding to each other simultaneously, and going back to watch Yoryuki frustrate his grandson. The tag had turned into a duel at some point, but it didn't matter as Yoryuki was clearly having fun with the deeply frustrated heir. How about we end it here? Yoryuki said upon tripping Byakuya's legs, pointing in the direction of his grandfather. Grr, this isn't over, woman. He gritted his teeth as he stood up. When he looked up again, he saw Swafon and another man beside Yoryuki. He wasn't surprised at seeing Swafon, but he was surprised as he didn't feel when the other man arrived. He could only feel Swafon and Yoryuki's presence before looking up. They watched as he turned around and walked away grumbling before applying shunpo to disappear from the yard. See you later, Ishir. She waved in the direction of the sulking lad before leaving with her two guards. On the other side away from the Shine clan, Jinrei and his grandson travelled back to Kukaki clan via shunpo when Byakuya asked curiously after remembering something. Did Lady Yoryuki get another retainer? He was back to wearing the calm of a noble in front of his dear grandfather, different from how crass he was with Yoryuki. Yes. Itachi Uchiha, he is called. Jinrei informed Byakuya, who frowned slightly. Is he from any of the lower noble families? He asked, but his grandfather shook his head and explained Itachi's presence beside Yoriuki, before asking in turn. Why do you ask? Byakuya shook his head to disperse any other thoughts about the retainer. Nothing. I just didn't realize when he arrived. Jinrei nodded at Byakuya's observation. He's a highly skilled Shinigami, was all he said, and they both left it at that. A few weeks later, Itachi flitted around trees as he made his way back to the Soul Society after spending a few days in the closer Rukonga districts. He remembered that he didn't feel Junpei's riot soul lingering around any of the spots he passed and surmised that that boy was either successful in getting in or moved away from the area. He didn't realize why he helped the boy, but he nodded to himself as he was certain that the boy passed. His mind went back to a message he got from Yoriuki telling him to come back as he had a mission with some of the other members of the division, cleansing souls in the world of the living and purifying some hollows. This was a standard Shinigami duty and one he was eager to do for a bunch of various reasons. He passed the gates and arrived at a guarded area near the Kid Corps division, which was also the first time he was seeing members of this division. The moment he arrived, he identified the person from his division leading him and two others on this mission. You're right on time, Itachi, their team leader said to him. While he wasn't that known in the second division, anyone with a keen eye would easily notice that he is mostly around the captain and her bodyguard than anyone else. I think the captain said that this is your first time purifying souls, so be sure to watch closely. Itachi silently nodded. Though he remained calm on the outside, his mind was in a turmoil of anxiousness and desperate hope. The members of the Kid Corps working the Senkaimon, the gate used to travel between worlds, powered the gate up after a few minutes of Itachi's arrival and gave them the okay to go through. As Itachi stepped through, he noticed they appeared in a white room with another door that opened, and when they stepped through, Itachi quickly noticed two things. First was that a seal was placed on his Ryutsu. Though he could easily break it, he didn't, as this was something he had read and Yoriuki had told him about. How lieutenants and captains, or any Shinigami in general with those levels of Ryutsu, had their Ryutsu sealed to limit the potential destruction they would cause to the world of the living without it. Another thing Itachi noticed was just how different everything looked. Chapter 53, Chapter 52, Loss and Truth. Either people change or they die before they do. It's one or the other. Orochimaru. While the houses bore some resemblance to what Itachi was familiar with, that wasn't the difference that Itachi saw, nor the one that drove the cold blade of realization through his stomach. The small city below them and the people moving at this time of the evening was familiar with Itachi, but what wasn't familiar was the lack of anything that showed that a ninja was down below, especially in a big hidden village like this, if it was a hidden village at all. There were practically no defenses as far as he could tell. He had thought that it was because they were too high up in the sky, but it was still the same even when they made their way to the ground. No signs of chakra or a shinobi in sight. No anti-sensory barrier around the city or any sort of defense at all. Even the architecture looked different as he got a closer look. Itachi was blankly looking around when their team leader called out to him. Itachi, mind focusing? The souls we're releasing are around here. Everything is different. Though it was possible that he was in some foreign land in or around the elemental nations, his instincts told him it wasn't so. It was familiar to some level from what Itachi remembered, and yet it felt foreign. It was like he could just tell that his home where he came from was nowhere near. He remained silent as the leader directed them to where the soul of a man wandered around, except that this soul had a phantom chain stuck on their chest. Cons: this is a purifying technique that Shinigami used in sending wandering souls like this to the afterlife by tapping the hilt of their blade on the forehead of the souls. He watched numbly as the man performed the process twice and led them to other souls to do the same. When it got to Itachi's turn to perform the cons, the frightened and unsure soul asked him rather shakenly. Will I really go to heaven? Itachi didn't know how to feel when looking at the soul. I wouldn't truly call it heaven, but it is the afterlife if that helps. He pressed the hilt of his blade against the head of the man's spirit and watched as it slowly disintegrated into lights to be reborn in the Soul Society. Well, that takes care of that. Now it's time to kill some nearby hollows. Itachi was still out of it when he tracked down a hollow and swiftly killed it without it ever sensing him. There was still the hope that if he could figure out where he was, he might be able to find the hidden leaf village and see how it was doing after the war. Hopefully maybe even find his brother and find out how he was doing after his second death. And then what? This was a thought that started appearing to him recently anytime he thought back to the village or Suzuki. What would he do now as a wandering soul that he couldn't do in his life, one he spent practically running away from Suzuki. It wasn't until the end of this small exercise that Itachi was finally able to come back to his senses after taking a major step towards the closure he wanted. Very good, Itachi. He heard a voice in his head that he hadn't heard before. It wasn't anything like Tsukuyomi's soft thrumming voice that sounded both young and old, this one sounded old and harsh, full for the lack of a better word. Amaterasu. No matter how many times he called, he didn't hear any other word from the voice that was very well the other half of his Zanpakuto spirit. Seeing he wouldn't be getting an answer any time soon, he stopped and reserved speaking to Tsukuyomi about it when he got back to the Seireitei. And that takes care of the last hollows in the area. It's time to head back. A Senkaimon opened a moment later and they all passed through and arrived back at the Soul Society. Despite not having exerted himself on this assignment, Itachi felt as if he felt lighter. His heart no longer felt heavy as it did. His visit to the world of the living made him start accepting that there was nothing still holding him tied to the village, or even Suzuki. Suzuki made his wish of dying come through, so he should have less attachment with anything concerning his life, and he was beginning to understand that. Itachi, follow me. His team leader said as they left the Senkaimon area. Captain Chien said I should bring you along with me when coming to give my report. Itachi said nothing before body flickering in his next direction while his poor team leader struggled to catch up. The man arrived at Yoriuki's office while panting a bit after a minute of Itachi waiting for him. Fast fuckers. He grumbled and knocked before pushing the door open. My team and I have returned, Captain Chien. The man gave his account of the assignment he and his team carried out, saluted and left Itachi behind as he left. With the three of them left behind, Swafon hiding in the roof, Yoriuki regarded Itachi with a knowing smile. Your eyes are looking a bit healthy. See anything good? Seeing the knowing smile on her face, Itachi realized that Yoriuki might have singled him out for this particular mission and for the particular reason why she said his eyes were looking healthy. What I didn't see is more apartment. Itachi spoke with melancholy. It's a bit different from what I remembered. And besides, I don't think there's anything I would have done if it was as I remembered it. Though she didn't fully understand what he meant, he could relate a bit to what he was feeling. Well then. I'm looking forward to the type of Shinigami you'll become. She said before dismissing him. Watching as he left, Yoriuki thought about what must be going on in his mind now and how she wanted to see how it'll affect him. Time slowly passed in the Soul Society, and with it came the consequences of its passing change. For some souls, this meant nothing important, while for others this meant drawing ever so closer to the answers they sought. For others it represented the dawn of new beginnings and achievable dreams. Chapter 54, Chapter 53, Itachi, the Shinigami. Knowledge and awareness are vague, and perhaps better called illusions. Everyone lives within their own subjective interpretation. Itachi Uchiha. It has been 5 years since Itachi was born in the Soul Society and 4 years since he joined the Godai 13 as a Shinigami in Yoriuki's 2nd Division under special circumstances. Wearing the standard Shinigami Shiakush, but with it being longer and wider that it functioned as a robe that hid his full body, Itachi was currently alone in the world of the living, cleansing hollows in a densely populated rural area. Stepping on a Rishi platform in the middle of the sky, his red eyes scanned the area below and picked up the last remaining bits of hollow Ryutsu, prompting him to move into action. Against these lower-level hollows with subpar Ryutsu control, Itachi had no problem in getting rid of them and quickly to the next. That should be the last one, he said to himself after performing a last survey. Though I think there's been an increase in hollow activity recently. Third seat Itachi, we're picking up no hollow activity in your area. The Senkaimon is ready for your return. He heard the voice of a personnel from the 12th Research Division at the same time as he saw the Senkaimon opening in the sky. As for his position as third seat, there was little he could do in refusing Yoriuki for so long that she became annoyed and just signed his name for the position. For Itachi's peace of mind, his position as the third seat didn't mean all that much, and there was little to no duties tied to the position. They were more of a rank of strength than anything. Just a little more, he thought as he went through the Senkaimon. For the last few years, Itachi focused most of his time in perfecting his synchrony with his Zanpakuto, and while he had only heard Amaterasu's voice once, confirmed by Tsukuyomi, he knew he was now closer than ever to finally being strong enough to wield both his Zanpakuto spirits. With these years that he focused solely on Tsukuyomi, his control and utilization of Tsukuyomi's illusion was now levels above what he was able to do before. He also realized that though not completely, his Zanpakuto also manipulated his victim's Ryutsu to some level, making it even harder to break out of his illusions. The best illusions were the ones that weren't distinguishable from reality from all his former illusions. Izanami was the one that was closest to being a perfect illusion, according to Tsukuyomi. Izanagi, on the other hand, was the one that Tsukuyomi deigned as the pinnacle of illusions. A truly godlike technique that made reality into an illusion, with the only thing stopping Tsukuyomi from calling it the greatest of all techniques being the limits and conditions of its application. Itachi wondered what would be its effects now that he was using an energy more potent than chakra. It is definitely stronger than it was during your life. But the cost is still something that I'm unsure of. Tsukuyomi had replied when he questioned it. He only hoped a situation won't arise where he'll be put in a situation to consider it. No one knew that his Zanpakuto was a twin spirit type because both spirits would have both awakened during his attainment of Shikai, but they didn't, and only Itachi knew why. Theoretically speaking, Itachi had a level of innate synchrony and familiarity with his Zanpakuto spirits that he should have achieved Bankai, not a perfect one, but he was already at the threshold of the level of connection needed. It was just that the container that was his spirit body was not at that level, and the Ryōko needed was still below the required level. The reason for this being the very nature of his eyes, the Sharingan, specifically the Manjiki Sharingan that he unlocked during his life. Since his Manjiki served as the spirit nature of his Zanpakuto, and given that he had unlocked them before and his familiarity with them, in a way he already had an understanding of the nature of his Bankai. Third seat Itachi, I see you're back from your mission. He paused his walk as he came across Lisa Yudmaru with two Shinigami behind her. Lieutenant Yudmaru, greetings. She brushed aside his formal way of speech and nodded politely at him. I was about to visit the 2nd and 4th Division. I see. Any particular reason? He said as she caught up to him. With Captain Kiriko being one of the people he was closest to during his time as a Shinigami, he had grown a bit familiar with the man's lieutenant. It's our turn to teach some of the older students at the academy. I say teach, but it's more like accessing the level of their skill in respective areas. She explained as they walked together. Members of different divisions cover specific areas of the assessment. Itachi said nothing as she explained, only silently listening until they got to where they separated. Should I tell the captain that you might be stopping by tonight? Don't. I just returned from a mission. He said as he went towards his house. Like all workers, Shinigami too were also paid, given that they also had needs and wants of luxury and comfort as living beings. Getting an apartment at one of the open areas of the Siraidai was one of the things he did with the money he had saved up. Staying in the barracks was fine, but it felt too public to someone like him. Oh, and I heard Captain Zaraki is being his usual self again. He already beat up Lieutenant Kyan and tried ambushing the 5th third seat Ichimaru. Apart from his first time escaping Captain Zaraki, the battle maniac captain had only sought him out twice after that, so he wasn't that worried about the man. Sighing as he entered his small abode, he thought about how almost nothing seemed to have happened in the 3+ years since he became a Shinigami. Things quickly grew stale around here, he realized, that almost everything seemed to become a routine. After taking a bath to cool off, Itachi looked at his reflection in the mirror and noted that his hair had grown rather long, but he just kept it tied up in 2 knots like he always did. Even without being 30 yet, his face was aged and the resulting lines of stress were clearly seen across his face. He cooked a simple meal for himself and took his time, aware that he was yet to give his required report, but still took his time as he knew that Yuryuki was likely buried in paperwork. When he finally arrived at her office, hours after his return, he was met with a pointed glare from Swafon but ignored it and took his seat where a few papers were arranged. He had found himself being promoted to an office assistant after rising to the rank of 3rd seat, so he had to help with her workload when it came to the division, whatever it may be. Instead of trying to stab him with your eyes, why don't you use Suzumibaki, Swafon? Yuryuki asked. It would have been fun to watch if only she didn't know the outcome. So. Nothing serious. Hollow activity picking up a little. He said offhandedly as he read the papers on his desk, pausing as he came to the last one that he held out to Yuryuki. What is this? She replied just as offhandedly as he did. Nothing serious. Just listed you as one of the combat instructors for the academy assessment. Hakuda? He asked again, tentatively. Yuryuki managed a shrug while squinting some reports she held. It's what we are specialized in, that and ho. And Marino-chin? Itachi asked about the gaudy and pompous lieutenant that was purely at that rank because of politics. Yuryuki waved it off as she stood up and adjusted her haori. Don't worry, he's got his own work cut out for him. She walked to the corner of the office where a bunch of luxurious and comfortable cushions were laid out, and plopped herself down. yawning relaxingly as she did. I see a few lieutenants here. He pointed out. And? Embarrass my division in front of the other lieutenants. She scoffed at the thought of her fat and slightly competent lieutenant disgracing himself and her. He was strong, yes, but not a competent lieutenant. Just my luck then. He dropped the report he'd written on Yoriyuki's desk and turned to leave. He briefly wondered if it would have been better had he been another division instead of the second, but couldn't come up with an answer. If he had known Yoriyuki would saddle him with more work, he would have taken his time in the world of the living. Lieutenant Yudmare likely informed her of his arrival and in one of her petty streaks, listed him for more work because he just so happened to be free when she wasn't. Thinking about his next assignment, he couldn't help but remember someone he hadn't seen in 3 years. Chapter 55, Chapter 54, Who's that? You're such a child. You talk of nothing but pipe dreams. There are times when people must make painful choices. Itachi Uchiha. The students of the Shin Academy hurried to the Zanjutsu Hall where some of their seniors were undergoing an assessment test. The only students allowed in the Zanjutsu Hall were those a year or two below the assessing year, and some among them weren't allowed entrance so as not to crowd the hall inside. The Shin Academy curriculum was an extensive course of a 6-year time frame, but one could graduate earlier at any time they finished the course. The record of the fastest speedrun of the curriculum was held by Jin Ichimaru, 3rd seat of the 5th division. Among the students trying to gain a way in, a dark-haired young man with a grass stalk in his mouth managed to calmly sneak through the guards who were threatening the crowd of students. His composure radiated calm and confidence that instinctively seemed to stop someone from doubting him. Safely getting past the guards, his calm facade gave way to a lopsided grin, one full of amusement as he successfully managed to fool his way in. Normally this was supposed to be a class-only affair, but the distinction between the last 2 years was barely existent that they could join in on most of their activities. Now let's see how good the 6th years are with Zanzensaki. He muttered to himself as he joined the platform of watching senior students with his mask of confidence back on. Are those the squad members for the assessment? He asked a girl beside him who nodded with a serious expression on her face. 4 lieutenants, 3 third seats and 3 from the Kid Corps. Junpei gulped upon hearing the lineup of the final assessment. He was still a ways up from taking the final assessment, talk less of speedrunning the curriculum in a year or two like those crazy geniuses. Completely ignoring Kid, just Zanjutsu and Hakuto were already too much for him to master at his level. Ho was just a step below Kid in the arts, he completely sucked at it. It didn't help that both relied heavily on one's utilization of Ryutsu, the bane of his ironic existence. It's starting. The serious girl besides him shushed everyone around them even though no one was talking. For the students of the Shin Academy, even if they dreamed of joining a specific division, except they specifically grew in the arts related to that division, the head instructor and those in charge of graduating were the ones who chose where they'll end up depending on their assessment. Have any idea who those guys are? He asked the girl besides him, causing her to frown and stare at him incredulously with a bit of suspicion. What? You're in your 5th year and you still can't recognize the lieutenants and some of the third seats? The reason she assumed so was because they were near the assessment field where only the 5th and repeating 6th year occupied. I'm not good with faces and names. He replied succinctly. She gave him a blank stare but didn't question it any longer, only pointing at where the lieutenants and other official Shinigami stood. That's Lieutenant Aizen, I'm sure you know him since he lectures a lot at the academy, especially the optional courses. Junpei nodded as he knew the brown-haired man as one of the best lecturers in the whole academy. Lisa Yudmaru, lieutenant of the ATH, she said pointing at Lisa and the tall white-haired woman she was talking with. That's Lieutenant Aizen. Lieutenant of the 4th and one of the kindest lieutenants ever. She's also my personal favorite. The last is Lieutenant Kyan, from the Shiba clan, 13th division. They say he's one of the strongest lieutenants, and a very kind man too. Junpei looked at the lieutenants with barely concealed longing, wondering how long it'd take to get to such a level as them. A very long time, maybe even impossible, but that didn't stop him from trying. And those 3 from the Kid Corps? The girl shook her head. Hardly anything or anyone from the Kid Corps is known. I see. He nodded as that was something he also knew. The Kid Corps' presence was just that non-existent. Anything special about the third seats then? She groaned and didn't hide how irritated she was at his questions, and Junpei picking up on that could only scratch his head. The white-haired one is Jin Ichimaru. The record-breaking genius. Yes. That very one. She sighed heavily. I heard he's now the third seat of the 5th division, directly under Lieutenant Aizen. That woman is Miyako Shiba, Lieutenant Kaien's wife, also from the 13th Division. As for the last guy, I don't think I've heard of him. She said, scrunching her face up as she tried to remember the dark-haired man that stood with the third seats observing the examinees. Oh? You don't know him? Not even his name. He could only sigh as he saw her nod. He looked back at the unnamed third seat and couldn't help but grin. After 3 years in the Shin Academy, this was the first time he was coming across that face after that night in the woods. He mused happily to himself. Mr. Shinigami. Third seat, hey. You really are a badass. Did you say something? Nah. Let's keep quiet for now, it looks like it's about to start. He said as everybody seemed to quiet down. Oh, and I'm Junpei by the way. Miwa. Down in the open field, gave a curt nod at the 13th's third seat, Miyako Shiba, who introduced both herself and Jin to him. Itachi, hey? So you're that Ryoka a while back that got admitted into the second. Jin smiled as he leaned forward towards Itachi and laid his hand out for a shake. Just call me Jin. Itachi. Likewise. Itachi narrowed his eyes slightly at Jin, who was squeezing his hands and refusing to let go. Mind letting go? Third seat Jin. Please refrain from causing a scene. Jin smiled and rubbed the back of his head embarrassedly at Aizen's scolding. I'm sorry if he made you uncomfortable, Itachi. No worries. Itachi said dismissively. He was used to the eccentricities of souls in the afterlife. Don't make it sound as if I was bullying him, Vice. He's from the second, those guys are scary. It was clear to all that he didn't mean any single word he said. The assessment quickly started and they had to personally assess the students in the field they were picked for. For Itachi, that was Hakuda, Shinigami hand-to-hand combat. It was unknown whether Yoryuki enlisted him specifically for this reason or not, that being testing the students in Hakuda against someone who could copy his opponent's move. The three from the Kid Corporate along with Aizen oversaw the Kid assessment test, Had, Bakud and Kaide, while Aizen and Kaien presided over the Zanjutsu assessment. The remaining three, Jin, Miyako and Itachi, were in charge of Hakuda and Ho, since the two worked better in tandem. Well now, don't be scared. We'll make sure not to hurt ya if that's what you're scared about. Jin softly reassured the first three people that got to them. The rules are simple, do not draw out your Zanpakuto or use Kid. This test is purely Hakuda and Ho. Miyako reminded the three of them as they squared off against their opponents. Dong. The bell signaling them to begin resounded and the students immediately pressed on the attack but soon found out the difference between the third seats and those who took 6 years to complete the course. The man fighting Itachi was especially frustrated as nothing he did seemed to faze Itachi one bit. Shunpo? His little mastery of it couldn't compare to Itachi's speed, either with Shunpo or Shunshin, body flicker. Hand-to-hand combat? Itachi was a master taijutsu fighter whose skill did not lose a single ground to Yoryuki. Damn it! The man cursed and tried running circles around Itachi to confuse him, but Itachi calmly kept his gaze forward and while taking a single step, blocked the man's running path and drove his elbow into the man's stomach. The man's eyes rolled backwards as he fainted upon the impact. Next. Itachi's calm words were held by those paying attention to the Hakuda/Ho battles. The other examinees sucked in cold breaths at the sight of someone getting knocked out in the first few minutes of the assessment. Jin whistled, though his eyes were faintly narrowed. Like I said. Scary. The medics from the 4th on standby quickly carried the poor man away and Itachi resumed his assessment. Hakuda and Ho. Nothing else. Was the only thing he said to any of the students he faced. It didn't take long for the attention on the Hakuda/Ho assessment to increase as the second and third students were swiftly knocked out while the other two third seats were still fighting their second student. By the Spirit King. Who is that guy? This question started circling in everyone's head, including Miwa who sat near a wryly smiling Junpei. That would be Mr. Shinigami. He didn't know if anyone heard him but he didn't care as he was smiling heartily at the display of Itachi's skill. Chapter 56, Chapter 55, Understanding the Roots. Those who forgive themselves, and are able to accept their true nature. They are the strong ones. Itachi Uchiha. In a secluded room overseeing the open field down below, where the 6th year assessment was being done, a few important people were watching the tests and deciding the future of the final year students. But there was a small issue. Is this okay, Captain Commander? He's being unfair to the students with such a display. The head instructor and stand-in director of the academy under Yamamoto, Oboro Kukaki, frowned as Itachi swiftly incapacitated yet another student. I don't think he's been extreme. He's probably taking this just as seriously as we are. Don't you think so, old man Yama? Kirikou tipped the side of his hat to look at his old teacher/father figure. Yamamoto grunted but said nothing in favor of or against Itachi's actions. The students are practically avoiding him. Oboro Kokaki, a very old man, scoffed as he saw none of the students looking in Itachi's direction, even going as far as to line up behind Jin and Miyako. Another spectator, Jaishur Yukatake, the frail captain of the 13th Division, remarked with criticism. Then I'm afraid it can be counted for them as their shortcoming if they can't understand what he's doing. You are right, Jaishur. Kirikou agreed, adding on to further clarify. It's also why none of us have reprimanded him. I still don't understand. It is quite simple, Director Oboro. The young man down there is basically holding back and fighting them at their one level. It's just a difference of skill. The last person in the room, Captain Anohanaretsu, explained to the Kokaki elder. That means this is truly an assessment of skills. Hence we can't call him out with how serious he is with his task. It also helps that he gives them the chance and space for them to show their skill. A perfect test for comparison, if you will. Anohana's calm and serene voice sounded through the room, earning silent nods from everyone except the captain commander. Kirikou looked at Itachi and couldn't help but acknowledge the boy's skill and insight. The skill to pull off something like this so easily is commendable on its own rights. Down below, almost half of the spectators had their attention solely on Itachi's assessment as their mind was now looking forward to how long someone lasted against Itachi instead of complaining about how harsh he was. This had started when someone from the crowd yelled something that not only made the 6th-year students angry and frustrated, but also put pressure on the lieutenants and third seats. He's not even a lieutenant. He's just a third seat, damn it. The power of suggestion and social pressure showed itself as some of the braver students, a very scant few, went back to line behind Itachi. I'll fucking show you, smug bastard. They all thought, joined together under the single goal of beating Itachi. With how the crowd and some of the final year students were reacting to the insurmountable wall that was Itachi, the other lieutenants and seated Shinigami were pressured not to put up a subpar assessment. Hajime from year 6. Please guide me. Itachi, 2nd Division 3rd seat. Likewise. Hajime stared at Itachi with a determined look in his eyes as they circled each other with the back of their hands touching the other. Opening up with a flurry of punches and kicks, Hajime spun and brought down his heel on Itachi's head, only for the latter to slither away from the strike gracefully. Hajime tried pressing forward but nothing he did seemed to help. Itachi was just too skilled, even despite holding back, that it hurt more than consoled them after they realized that fact. Surrender. Hajime heard Itachi's voice from behind and felt 2 fingers at the side of his neck, causing him to sigh dejectedly. When Itachi looked up, he realized that he had run through most of the students for Hakuda and Ho, the only ones remaining were the ones still clashing against Jin and Miyako. He was already walking away when he felt a strong gaze on him, one that felt familiar and he remembered quite well. There in the front crowds among the 5th year, he saw the grinning face of Junpei staring and then suddenly waving at him. He feels stable, and 5th year. Itachi thought surprised. He nodded at the youth before turning around to find somewhere to sit as he was done but someone called him back. Itachi, mind staying behind for a bit? We have to give our personal assessment too. The assessment took a few hours after which Kyan led them to an adjacent building where Itachi could feel some powerful presences. Captain Commander, Lieutenant Kyan requesting to enter. Come in. They entered the room and saw 5 people, 4 captains and the academy director, and it was then that some of them realized that these 5 people had probably watched the whole assessment. First to give their reports were the lieutenants, followed by the 3 Shinigami from the Kid Corp, and then the third seats. It was a simple enough report that they quickly went through it and coincidentally Itachi was the last to give his report and also last to leave the room. He gave a clear and concise report on the students he assessed to which the captains and director either gave a rare nod or just listened in silence. And your methods of assessment, don't you think it was a bit too harsh? The director squinted his eyes at Itachi while the others remained silent. No, I don't. Itachi simply replied. It was an assessment before they are put into line of duty. I believe I was fair. A few questions later and they permitted him to leave. After he walked out of the room, the director turned to Yamamoto and asked. Is there a reason why he's still considered a third seat? From what I saw, his skills should put him at the level of a lieutenant. He looked at the captains in confusion, two of whom shrugged nonchalantly, one simply remained silent, while the last stroked his long beard. He's never challenged anyone for the position of lieutenant. Even his promotion to third seat was pushed by his captain. Yamamoto answered. So he doesn't care much for the position and status. A bit similar to Kyan, no. In some ways, but not entirely. Kiriko commented and lent a hand to Jaishur to pull him up. This is where I say goodbye. What are you thinking about, Captain Anohana? Yamamoto suddenly asked, looking at Anohana who had looked to be in the middle of her thoughts. She shook her head softly as she rose up to leave. Nothing important, head captain. I'll be taking my leave as well. Itachi was currently sitting in a cave with his Ryutsu softly billowing around him with his sword resting across his legs. I can't seem to push through. What do you think it is, Tsukuyomi? You are already at the threshold, and with the unexpected troubles you seem to be having, I reckon you need a spark. A figurative spark to reignite the flame so to speak. Itachi exhaled as he stood before Tsukuyomi. Both covered with smokes of illusory crows, a testament to the familiarity between them that most Shinigami lacked. How will I understand if Amaterasu refuses to speak? Amaterasu is just as part of you as it is its own soul. The answer to your problems lies between you and Amaterasu. I have no power to interfere. Like always, Tsukuyomi's advice was always vague, but Itachi had known him for some time to figure out what the giant crow meant. Perhaps the problem lies in the roots, what makes Tsukuyomi and Amaterasu different, and why are we essentially one and the same at our roots? In other words, me. Itachi stated matter-of-factly, except when he looked around Tsukuyomi was already gone. Figuring out problems relating to the soul was always such a headache even when one was a soul. He had spent the last few years growing his soul capacity and his understanding of Tsukuyomi, and now that he was ready to reconnect with Amaterasu, he was suddenly experiencing a block. What is the spark Tsukuyomi was talking about? What is Amaterasu at its roots? What was the most basic thing about Amaterasu that he remembered? It burns. It's a flame, hence it burns. If Amaterasu is a part of my soul, then that means there's a part of me similar and no different to Amaterasu. A burning flame. Passion or desire? Both. He was on the cusp of figuring it out, he could feel it. He was a genius even amongst geniuses. Who could understand him better than himself? The roots. If Tsukuyomi and Amaterasu are the same at their roots, with both of them being me at the same time, then that means I'm just as synchronized with Tsukuyomi as I am with Amaterasu, or should be. If Tsukuyomi can be described as calm and deceiving, a personality trait Itachi shared, then Amaterasu's burning flame was also a trait Itachi had, but perhaps wasn't expressing. Chapter 57, Chapter 56, Itachi vs Yoryuki I. Even the strongest of opponents always has a weakness. Itachi Uchiha. Itachi skillfully parried Yoryuki's blade, but the captain just grinned as he did, twirling the unbalanced blade around her fingers and balancing it back in her palms. Come on, she beckoned with her blade, and Itachi readily accepted the invite. Holding his short tanto blade across himself, the both of them closed the distance between them in an instant and sparks flew everywhere which way. You're more aggressive than you usually are, Itachi boyo. What's up? She asked as they held their blade in a clash. Grunting, Itachi twisted his sword to hook in her sword, and she did the same, smiling at him as she did so, though with a few annoyed twitches appearing on her face. He held her strong arm and she did the same to him, both limiting their opponent's option to disarm them. Tired of the pointless struggle, Itachi turned abruptly, hands still locked with hers, and used his legs to trip her from behind to throw her over his shoulders to the ground. His hand went down to her head in a spear motion, but her lightning-fast reflexes had her hands holding his just centimeters from her losing the match. She wrapped her legs around his arms and threw him over, but it was a cheap shot he was already expecting, so he used the force from his flip to palm her head with the arm she held. As if knowing the other's next move, they both sheathed their blades and continued their rounds in a bout of fisticuffs. Yoryuki's dexterity was something Itachi didn't have, but that didn't mean he was totally helpless against her blindingly fast jabs and chops. The extreme mastery both ninjas displayed was top-notch, even among the Shinigami of Seireitei. Unfortunately, Itachi couldn't quite match up with Yoryuki in hand-to-hand combat with how fast and deceptively strong she was. It was also the reason why he had to use his Sharingan to comfortably read her movements the first time they fought. What's wrong, Itachi boyo? You're slipping. She teased him, although inwardly impressed at how much he could defend against her movements without his special eyes that could instantly read an opponent's movements. You're thinking too much right now, Itachi. Don't think, just push through. She advised but clicked her tongue when she saw him completely ignoring her. Itachi was a very methodological fighter and all his habits and character traits showed that, which was a stark opposite to Yoryuki's free nature. Itachi trained every single technique with utmost dedication and methodology that it became an instinct, whereas Yoryuki trained hers with such open mind and freeness that it became something of a bestial instinct. Two different paths, yet they met each other at the top of the martial arts ladder. Parry. Feint. Swipe. Claw. Parry. Dodge. Kick. Block. Counter. Their hands moved in blurs so fast that the slightest mistake could take someone's head off. The climax of their first salvo of hand clashes ended with Yoryuki panting a bit while Itachi picked himself up from the tree he was kicked into. "You're really not an easy opponent, Itachi," she said, sighing as she did. She fully meant what she said because it was tricky as hell and nerve-wracking to fight him. Granted, they weren't pulling out all the stops, but even if they were, that just meant that he became more trickier to deal with. With his eyes to copy martial art techniques and also kid spells, at least to an extent, limited precognition in reading his opponent's next move, enhanced reflexes and multiplying his already perfect accuracy, and also being able to see energy patterns all from a pair of patterned red eyes. Just his eyes were enough as it were, but Yoryuki digresses. He also had an illusion type Shikai that did a little bit of Shinji's Hiriko's Bankai, and a whole lot of other nasty illusions that thoroughly fucked with someone's head. So yet, she meant every word about him not being an easy opponent. Aside from his lacking energy reserves and the intensity of sheer power, he could go toe-to-toe with any captain of the Godi I-13 skill-wise. "You fought differently today, why is that?" she asked as they took a second to calm their breaths before the next confrontation. "Understanding," Itachi simply said, offering no other explanation. Unfortunately for Itachi, Yoryuki had dealt with souls and all types of soul-related issues ever since she was young enough to wield an Asachi, so it didn't take her a second to know what he was talking about, especially given his choice of words. "You're stumped because you can't seem to understand your Zanpakuto any further," she stated plainly, nodding in perfect understanding. "Don't kill yourself over it. It happens to every Shinigami, especially when you're about to smash through a power ceiling. What do you do about it?" he asked, neither acknowledging nor refuting her earlier words. Same problem, different reasons, so different answers. She threw away her captain's Hayori and started stretching to exercise her joints. Sometimes it's best to stop and let it come back full circle. Sometimes it's an introspection. Sometimes it's stubbornly forcing your way, etc. Itachi said nothing, only nodding while mirroring Yoryuki in taking off his black kosud, the shirt, leaving him with his white undershirt and the baggy hakama, the pants, or skirt. "If someone sees how serious you currently look, they'll think I'm forcing you to fight for your life. Try to loosen up. Enjoy this like I am." Yoryuki was now sporting a black sleeveless form-fitting top that went around her neck and left a good portion of her back and entire arm open if not for the pair of wrist warmers she wore. The air picked up around her in a contrasting calm yet violent way, thrumming as if the very air around her was charged up. The air around Itachi however was calm, almost dead, as his eyes slowly spun and gone were his pitch-black eyes. Instead in their place were a pair of red eyes with 3 dotted tomos on them. This time, Yoryuki didn't have a smile on her face. She was about to use a technique she had secretly developed some time ago and one very few people knew about. Not even Swa-Fon was aware of this. Terrace, Tsukuyomi. The air around Itachi's blade shimmered like a haze and for the first time, Yoryuki saw the true physical appearance of Itachi's blade, Tsukuyomi. It remained a short blade, but the blade itself was crystal clear, almost like the clearest or mirrors. "Shunk," she softly intoned, yet the air reishi molecules exploded into lightning charges that ran over her body and formed 2 vent-like wings behind her back. "I'll have you help me fine-tune this," she spoke, staring directly at Itachi. "You've asked a few times about my Zanpakuto, and I remember telling you one time that I don't need one. This is the reason. The only non-Zanpakuto Shinigami technique that can rival a Bankai." Itachi couldn't doubt her words when seeing the outrageous amount of Ryotsu being utilized and combusted in an instant. "A forbidden kid," he speculated. "Close, but not entirely. This is the perfect amalgamation of kid and Hakuta. Be careful, I can be a bit rough." That warning was the signal to begin, and like Itachi speculated, keeping up with her was no longer a possibility. Even if he had the Mangeki Sharingan, the results would have remained the same. Just because the Sharingan boosted perception to an insane degree did in no way mean that one could suddenly keep up with anything, irrespective of their speed. Luckily he expected this outcome. Caw. Yoryuki frowned as Itachi suddenly burst into crows upon her, striking him. Tsked. That annoying Shikai. The crows flying around her turned into flaming shurikens that started hurtling towards her. This is useless. A burst of lightning from behind her arrested all the shurikens and disintegrated to dust. She sensed someone behind her thrusting a blade, which caused her to turn around calmly and catch the blade in her hand, with Itachi's eyes widening as he found his motion completely frozen. With achieving the highest level of recorded Hakuta mastery, in utilization with Shunk allows me to freeze any motion I want. I see. Itachi struggled, saying, and disintegrated into crows. A clone. You know that such probing won't work, right? She closed her eyes and lightning vents crackled more fiercely, causing her to smile. Your illusions work by manipulating your opponent's Ryutsu, isn't that right? It must be hard for you to use your stronger illusions on me with how chaotic my Ryutsu currently is, right? I wouldn't be so sure about that. The air shimmered and Itachi walked out of an illusion. Facing me directly? I'm really starting to like you more, Itachi. She grinned and moved towards him, so fast that it was almost instantaneous even to Itachi's enhanced perception. The Bakud barrier he hastily constructed was torn through with the most effortless ease, and it was his reactionary response with Tsukuyomi by shifting the perception of his location that made him able to block her lightning-infused punch. Did you forget? I can arrest your motion. He knew, remembered fully well even. But he couldn't face her with subtle illusions, and something urged him on to confront the height of this new foe head-on. I remember it clearly. For the first time in his life, both lives, Itachi smiled genuinely at the prospect of combat, and in that moment, a small wicker turned into a wisp. Chapter 58, Chapter 57, Itachi vs Yoryuki 2. Telling yourself it's an illusion will do you little good. Itachi Uchiha. A deafening explosion rocked the silent forest first before it was engulfed in lightning and fire that turned over the very earth the two people fighting stood on. Yoryuki was easily the one with the overwhelming advantage, as it could be clearly seen how battered and covered in dust Itachi was. To battle Yoryuki, he felt it necessary to disable how she negated his motion after figuring it out. Other than the vents in every Shinigami wrists that are used to release Ryutsu, there are two other main pressure points in a Shinigami's body, the Seiketsu and Hakuzui, located in the heart region and sternum respectively. Blocking or destroying any of these pressure points could seal away a Shinigami's power, permanently cripple them or outright kill them. Yoryuki's mastery over Hakuta and her knowledge of the soul allowed her to manipulate the wrist vent by sending just the right amount of her shunk needed to freeze her target's nervous system. I need to offset her shunk with an equally intense force to cancel it out. Too much and I might just as well block it and kill myself from implosion. Slashing down the empty air with his sword, a bright yellow line was drawn as the blade traveled down. Head number 32, Kaizen. The bright yellow line shot out an encompassing yellow beam in Yoryuki's direction, but the agile and petite behemoth met it head-on and triumphed against it. You're faring better than I expected you to. But now you should understand that there's still a fundamental difference between skill and pure raw power. You have an astonishing level of skill, but your raw power is severely lacking. And that is where your Zanpakuto holds you back. She commented her observation while looking at Itachi, who even till now, was still thinking about how to level her advantage with his disadvantage. Deep inside him, something flickered violently upon hearing what Yoryuki said about the drawbacks of his Zanpakuto. Even Itachi disagreed with her. My Zanpakuto is not the problem, I am. The opposite of what you said being the truth, I am the disadvantage of my Zanpakuto. Yoryuki looked stunned at the admission. Itachi wasn't the only Shinigami to blame himself rather than his Zanpakuto, but there was a certain surety in his words that made it sound true. Are you good to go, or should we continue this another day? She offered, but he shook his head. I'm ready. Come. He beckoned her forward while brandishing his sword that was now a normal-length katana. Yoryuki's lightning came alive once more and she blinked to his front to throw him off, following up with a punch to the gut, only to raise her other hand to block a sword strike to her head after she realized that her hands didn't touch him. Spatial deception. Very Itachi-like. She grudgingly admitted. She looked around in the unnatural state of the battlefield. Left was right and right was halfway in the sky and halfway to the side. She was only able to keep track with him with the lightning around her acting as signal receptors to any like charges. She also had to regularly flex her ryutsu just to make sure. The one good thing about Shunk was that a slight relapse in focus would hurt her and disable the technique, which was also her saving grace the 5 times that attack caught her inside a genjutsu without her even knowing. Tsukuyomi. Manipulating those illusions are hard and you have to take care not to get drawn in. The Tsukuyomi technique is now vastly different from how you used it when you were alive. Clang. Crackle. Fist and blade met, Itachi dodging her punches with careful manipulation of the distance between them and Yoriyuki reacting to most of his blind attacks with nothing aside from instinct. Is there a reason to go this far? Self-gratification? Acknowledgement? Or is it to satisfy something else? Tsukuyomi asked, incomprehension laced in his voice as he struggled to understand why Itachi was entertaining her to tell detriment of himself. I don't know, but something tells me that hiding behind illusions for every fight isn't what I should be doing. I'm trying to see if I can figure anything out with this. Itachi admitted that he too was as clueless as to why he let the fight go on for this long. Just like how his illusions weren't infallible and almost moved against people like Jiraiya of the Sunin and Mukai Kohinata, the lost Hyuga who fought both him and Shisui and would have killed them too had it not been for Shisui's Manjiki Sharingan Genjutsu. What I wouldn't give to have my Manjiki at this point. He mused in nostalgia. Casting the Tsukuyomi technique without the basis of a Manjiki was dangerous as it was a genjutsu that could manipulate the perception of time and space of the victim to an unbelievable length. Yoriyuki lagged again for a brief moment before her shunk flared up and she was snapped awake with pain. Goddamned brat! She cursed and attacked a clone of Itachi which instantly dissipated and returned the feedback. Burn it all to the ground. Too little. Slowly and surely, Itachi figured out a way to counter her Shunk's basic ability through the help of his clones, the Sharingan helping him with the precise amount of energy needed to offset the intensity of Yoriyuki's Shunk. Face it head on. Something seemed to scream at him but he couldn't hear it, mind fully focused on confronting Yoriyuki's Shunk head on and resisting its destabilizing effects. And he did, much to the stunned surprise that was painted across Yoriyuki's face. But that wasn't the only surprise he had for her. At the split moment of stunned silence, Itachi took an illogical and unnecessary risk and cast Tsukuyomi on her. Being an illusory technique sharing the same name with one of the counterparts of Itachi's Zanpakuto spirit, Tsukuyomi, the Tsukuyomi illusion was a top-tier illusion technique that was as taxing to cast as it was to get out of. Unfortunately, he was yet to possess the Manjiki Sharingan needed to perceive and accurately manipulate the illusion without having to suffer the strain of the extended time. Not to mention the mental strain it would have on Yoriyuki if she spent centuries, or worse millennials, fighting and dying on repeat. Release. His world spun like a kaleidoscope that sucked his consciousness in, blinking as he found himself in a world of red moon and smoky black flames, heavily littered with his bodies that they formed literally hills. Looking towards the peak of the highest hill of bodies, Itachi saw someone crucified mercilessly like a pincushion with numerous blades, some transparent like his shikai and some swords made of solidified jet black flames. With a thought, the world rearranged itself and he was now atop Yoriyuki's peak with all the transparent blades gone, leaving her still impaled with the black ones. This isn't Tsukuyomi. He realized. The sensation of this illusion didn't feel like any of his other illusions that all had traces of Tsukuyomi's presence in them. Of course, here isn't Tsukuyomi. Similar, but something entirely different. He turned around but he didn't see anything to identify as the presence he was feeling. Amaterasu. The black flames that were the soil under the body-littered ground flickered excitedly in response to Itachi's call. Who else could it be? Amaterasu's voice, unlike Tsukuyomi's, reverberated hauntingly in a violent way deep inside Itachi's soul. I tried calling you countless times from this desolate world, but like always you ignored my voice. Only wishing to use me when your precious illusions fail you. Itachi frowned as he listened to Amaterasu speak, confused by why his own spirit would think of him that way when he has been trying to reach out to Amaterasu ever since he achieved his partial shikai. Even now with that woman who thought she could wantonly rampage here, you called out to Tsukuyomi first, never bothered to call me, even when the both of us are one and the same. The words you speak are false, Amaterasu. I have been trying to reach out to you years now. But you never once expressed my flames, did you? Not back then, and not now. And that was when it hit Itachi like Yoriyuki's Shunk. Habits. His personality was always calm, reserved, always wearing a facade, passively aggressive and rarely ever confrontational. A life of illusions, one where he only expressed a part of his soul, Tsukuyomi. He never appeared arrogant, forbearing, burning with passion and ambition, never, not once. always content to remain in the shadows. He sighed despondently and sat down atop the piles of his own body. I was never aware that my choices forced you to be shunned. Truthfully, I was never aware of a lot of things. He looked below at the flickering light and asked genuinely, having only ever shown such a genuine expression in a healthy bit of vulnerability. Help me understand you, Amaterasu. You, me, and Tsukuyomi, that's all we are, different parts of the same whole. He dipped one of his hands into a spot of the flickering black flame scattered across the ground. You know just as well as I that I wouldn't have neglected you if I knew how not to. Truthful words, but truer actions. The voice of Amaterasu breathed out in an old way of resignation. Even if I don't want to heed your words, you'd find a way to force me to. A/N, Amaterasu has been finally introduced and the Zanpakuto spirit seems hurt and betrayed that Itachi never expressed the part of his soul that was Amaterasu. Obviously his Zanpakuto spirits are different. This is technically their second life with Itachi, and going with the Uchiha lore, there are the proof of his love and pain. His eyes, both figuratively and literally. What is the essence of Amaterasu and how does it affect Itachi as a person? Welp, even I don't know yet. Chapter 59, Chapter 58, Amaterasu and Trushikai. This technique's weakness and risk, is my existence. Itachi Uchiha. What's happening to her, Amaterasu? Itachi asked, seeing Yuriyuki still knocked out even after pulling the blackened blades of Amaterasu out of her body. This is neither of both Tsukuyomi. The flames started and were now risen to attack his ankles. I forced my way through at the last moment and pulled her in here instead of Tsukuyomi. The old crow also approved. Itachi nodded absent-mindedly, not fully getting the gist of it, but getting enough to realize what happened. So what now? I would prefer if we settle whatever grievances you have towards me before we move forward. The flames calmed down at Itachi's words and almost became docile, but it never lost its threatening intensity. I've also realized that the only thing I know these black flames are special flames that can burn anything and can't be put off. What else is there to know about Amaterasu? Its voice, even while low, resounded like a deathly whisper in Itachi's ears. Tsukuyomi at its peak means achieving a state where reality and illusion can perfectly overlap, but at its core it's a perfect mirror to gaze back into your soul. That is why Tsukuyomi shines his light upon the world. Itachi replied, watching as one of the blackened blades fell apart and joined the flames on the ground. Why do you burn so fiercely, Amaterasu? Burn? Fiercely. Itachi could feel the intense emotions in Amaterasu words as it uttered them. Where do you see my fiercely burning flames? Your ignorant neglect reduced this once blazing inferno to the dead wickers you see now. To temper a wisp of flame to a mighty blaze depends on what you fuel your flames with. What did you temper these flames with? A sinking pit formed in Itachi's stomach as he stared at the desolate land with barely any blazing flame. He was the one supposed to fuel this endless expanse of flickering flames and he let them almost burn out. Nevertheless, he had already accepted himself to be at fault, so all he could do and hope for was for Tsukuyomi to tell him how to fix this. What happened to the burning flames you tempered as a child with your passion? What happened to the bright ambition you sheltered for your clan? The harshness of reality killed my naive dreams. Itachi replied with the jarring truth of his life growing up. The young child's passion was snuffed out in the smokes of war. Amaterasu's voice bellowed in a haughty laugh that sounded both condescending and disbelieving. Reality? Oh, how utterly ignorant you are, Itachi. Your touted genius intellect woefully fails you. The way the flames tried burning above his ankle level gave Itachi the image of the flames trying to stand up only to fall back down because no one offered it support. What feeble shackles does reality have on you that Tsukuyomi can't sever? Was it for such a ridiculous reason that the ambition and zeal that fueled my undying flames was lost and forever abandoned? The betrayal in Amaterasu's voice was so great that it caused Itachi to flinch with every word they voice spoke. The perspective of souls, especially the incredibly rare ones like Tsukuyomi and Amaterasu, were very different from their wielders. While Itachi could argue that his choices were limited, forcing him to sacrifice his family for the village, and to be saddled throughout his whole life with grief, from Amaterasu's perspective the problem began when Itachi lost his drive and ambition, the embers that stoked Amaterasu's blazing inferno. Having resolved himself to take all the blame, Itachi spoke tentatively after Amaterasu quieted down. I ask for just one chance. Heed my words this once and I promise you that I will bring back your black inferno. And how do you intend to do so? These flickering flames are the representation of your will, drive, dreams, passion, and your ultimate goal in life. Do you see how dead they are? Amaterasu asked rhetorically. I am the crystallization of your dreams and hopes, and yet I am simply non-existent. Then I'll rouse up my passion. I'll dream once more and I will achieve the goal I just set. Is that sufficient for you, Amaterasu? In that instant where Itachi stared at the flames in the ground and spoke of a goal, a tremble shot through the creeping flames covering this endless expanse and they flickered excitedly. What did you do, Itachi? Now Amaterasu was genuinely curious at what Itachi did to bring such an instant tremor of change. I only set my ultimate life goal at the top of everything else. He easily replied. And what specific ultimate goal is that? The very same one I destroyed with my hands during my lifetime. The reason why every Uchiha fight. A place to belong. A family. He had set a family as his ultimate goal. Understanding that, Amaterasu's laughter boomed further and the once grass-length flames now stretched to his knees and swallowed the endless corpses littered around. This was golden. Yes. This passion. This resolution. This revelation. Harness these well and I promise to be the greatest flame spirit ever wielded. Just like my undying flames, this is the undying promise between us, Itachi, stir up the passion of your soul and I'll raise up the blackest inferno that'll burn even the heavens to nothing. Amaterasu looked at Itachi, not how he looked but the structure of his soul and how it was starting to resonate with the barest hint of heat. It was very tiny to notice but it was still there. Why are you so quick to strive for something again, Itachi? Was it just to maintain your connection with me or was it something else? Amaterasu genuinely asked this time and Itachi's words pleased it greatly. It was easy. Knowing my lack of a goal to strive for is what made you like this, fully convinced me that even after living all these while I was still nothing more than a living husk. A life without a mission is vapid and vain. Slowly and gradually, the flames increased to the point that they were now as tall as Itachi and it was then that the black flames parted to reveal a human silhouette of black flames, like a raised shadow, with absolutely no features. Hark ye my words, Itachi. I am Amaterasu, the undying flame that consumes all. Be they heaven, be they the purgatory flames of hell, or the puppet strings of fate, they shall all be consumed in this desolate world of black inferno. The flames rose up another level as Amaterasu finally revealed its name and ensign to Itachi. The black representation of Amaterasu started shrinking before solidifying into a pitch-black katana that flew into Itachi's hands. The sheath of the blade turned into flames that were sucked into the hilt as Itachi brandished the blade to appreciate it. Consume all, Zenbushi, Amaterasu the undying flame of a desolate world. Kry Toshida Fumetsu no Jigoku no Sekai. At the exact instance of his utterance, a straight line was drawn from the sky to the ground that suddenly divided the world into two very familiar parts. With the red moon and swirling red clouds in the sky, the only difference between the two conjoined worlds was that one part was fully covered with towering inferno while the other part was dominated by endless murder of crows, emitting wisps of smoke and falling feathers as they flew. Standing as the foci of both worlds, Itachi stretched his hand towards Tsukuyomi's illusory world and called forth the spirit. Illuminate, Terrace, Tsukuyomi illusory world of darkness. The crows rushed towards him, joining together as they did to produce a normal-looking blade until the illusion faded away to reveal the crystal-clear sheen of the blade. Holding both parts of his shikai, Itachi brought both of their hilts together and the moment they touched they rippled like water and swiftly fused into a single blade that was pitch black on one side and crystal clear on the other with a Tau symbol on the hilt. And it was in this instance where both blades were brought together that Itachi finally unlocked his true shikai. Burn and reveal, truth-seeker embodiment of light and darkness, Kagesu to Sarekuru, Honshin Hikari to Yami. The first sensation Itachi got was a feeling of wholeness, one that was multiplied over after he gained his full shikai, truth-seeker. Stoke your passion into a tempestuous blaze, Itachi. It is the proof and fuel of your growth. He heard Amaterasu say, a special way of comforting people only unique to it or rather her. Seek your truth. Seek your adversary's truth. Make your own truth. Tsukuyomi advised. That reminds me. He said and flowed the spiritual form of Yoryuki towards him. Luckily for us, Amaterasu's intervention prevented any unforeseen accidents. Sheathing his sword on his hips, Itachi's Sharingan came alive once more as he cancelled what had been a grand illusion, at least for him. Instantly, the world of red faded away and they were back to the present without any time passing. With the backlash of her shunk and the mental load of the illusion, Yoryuki didn't know when she was sent hurtling through the forest with a few atrophied muscles. Chapter 60, Chapter 59, Anchoring Souls. And one day, when you have the same eyes as I, come before me. Itachi Uchiha. Yoriuki groaned as she struggled to stand up amidst the intense throbbing in her head that felt as if someone ripped it out and shoved something inside it. Where am I, Eric? She lost her balance and fell to the ground, twitching violently and gripping her head hard as she remembered what felt like weeks of fighting and dying suddenly being compressed to a fraction of a moment. Illusions. She couldn't believe it. This went above the realm of simple illusions, less the ability of a Shikai. She didn't even know when she got inside the illusion. Damn you, Itachi! She managed to get up, but that was with a lot of effort and she was still struggling with every step, feeling the phantom pains of getting stabbed through and burned. How far did I go? NNRGH. She grabbed her head harder, the desire of falling overcoming strong on her. This Ryutsu! What the hell? She pushed herself with gritted teeth and went towards the direction that was billowing with Ryutsu attack as Ryutsu. When she arrived, what she saw greatly surprised her, but not so much as it shocked her. Bankai! She saw Itachi standing in a daze, holding a blade of black and white, while wearing a black robe with red clouds on it. The robes looked as if they were made of black flames, while the red clouds felt as if they were actually moving around the robe, yet at the same time they weren't. On his forehead was a headband with the struck-through symbol of the hidden leaf depicting his identity as a rogue ninja. Itachi nodded and opened his eyes, taking in his new appearance with a surprised look on his face. He eventually smiled, startling Yoriuki as he did so, because while he despised all the members of the Akatsuki, it however represented a vital part of his identity. Yoriuki finally found her voice after staring for a few seconds. Is that Bankai? Shikai? Wait, what? She gasped, disbelief evidently visible on her face after Itachi confirmed what she just heard. But that's not possible. You already have a Shikai, unless... Itachi nodded. It was a partial release. I only unlocked one of its parts. He made a show of showing Yoriuki the crystal clear part of his sword. That's Tsukuyomi, and this, now showing the black part, is Amaterasu. His Ryutsu finally settled down and he cancelled his transformation, causing the robe and headband to blow away like smoke while his single blade separated into two, dark gloom black and crystal-like white, which he held in both hands. A dual Zanpakuto, Yoriuki muttered, and the vertigo finally took over her senses, causing her to fall, but Itachi held her by her shoulders. Let's call it off for today. You need rest. Yoriuki didn't say anything in objection when she saw how serious he looked, a very rare look for him. He carried her on his back and started running towards the 4th division. Your Zanpakuto? Is it an illusion and fire type? She groaned when he didn't reply and knew that was an automatic yes. Is there a problem? She groaned louder into his ears. I just don't want to deal with Central 46 about this. In the history of the Godai 13, only 2 people are dual Zanpakuto wielders, Kirikou and Yukatake, and they almost had theirs sealed when it happened. Itachi's eyes narrowed a bit at the mention of a seal, and Yoriuki felt it and quickly assuaged any budding worries. I said almost, right? You don't have to worry about it, and as long as your Zanpakuto doesn't threaten the Soul Society or the lives of other Shinigami, you're good. She paused. That illusion. What was it? Fine. They exchanged no other words until they got to the 4th division and Itachi took her in without anyone aware of their arrival. He had barely laid her down in an empty room and was about to look for Captain Anohana or her lieutenant when the door opened and both of them walked in. I felt someone sneaking in. Didn't expect it to be you. She said and paused upon seeing the person lying weakly on the bed. This is definitely a surprise. Captain Yoriuki. The tall white-haired lieutenant gasped. Hey there, Isane, Anohana. Yoriuki waved weakly. What happened? Anohana asked calmly as she walked over and examined Yoriuki. We fought. Itachi replied. But she doesn't look hurt enough to be this weak. Anohana pointed out and looked at Itachi with a pause before nodding. Side effects of an illusion, and a particular strong/mentally destabilizing one, I presume. Itachi nodded. Isane dear, lead the gentleman to a waiting room. I'll be with you in a minute. Isane nodded and led Itachi to an otherwise empty room with the only thing in it being the small table in the middle. Anohana came barely a minute later and sat across Itachi. Tea. She offered. Thank you, but no. The calm and homely aura she gave showed others what her true disposition was, as well as being the captain of the medical division. I can sense that your Ryutsu went a level higher, and I'll also assume those swords strapped to your waist are yours. Am I right? She said, pointing at the 2 blades on Itachi's hip. In their dormant state, both looked like normal blades with red and black sheaths. Captain Anohana, does that mean that? Anohana nodded at Isane. Yes. He's also a dual Zanpakuto wielder like Shunsui and Jushir. She then shook her head slowly at the rigid look on Itachi's face. You're not in any trouble, third seat Itachi. It's just that I'm concerned about the nature of the illusion you used on Captain Yoriuki. Had it been someone under her level, a severe headache and mental trauma will be the least of their problems. I see. It was a rather desperate attack on my end, and not something I can do easily without worrying about backlashes. He said, briefly explaining the way Tsukuyomi worked, basically saying it was just a stronger illusion that let him control his opponent's perception to an extent. He also wasn't lying about the backlash from using the Tsukuyomi Genjutsu, a strictly Manjiki technique. He was only saved from it because Amaterasu had taken control of it halfway. Luckily, it turned out Yoriuki just needed some rest and he left after some idle chat with Captain Anohana. Basically it was her telling him he should visit either Shunsui or Jushir for any insights they could give pertaining to his Zanpakuto. As if anyone could understand our nature better than you do. You do not need their counseling, Itachi. He agreed with the initial part of Amaterasu's sentence, but not with the latter, and it seemed Tsukuyomi did too. To listen to the counsel of others is not always about helping yourself, but understanding their view of the world. Their words are like a mirror to the truth that is their soul. I know that, Tsukuyomi. Amaterasu scoffed and Itachi could imagine her flames burning irately. What I mean, Itachi, is that you're also a newborn soul, thus impressionable to the ideal of others you find admirable even if you try to argue otherwise. Just know that the ideal you carry will influence the goal you achieve. Just like a flame, Amaterasu was fiery and intense, but also calm and warm. Fierce and dangerous, but at the same time soothing and protective. If Tsukuyomi was the wise elder, then Amaterasu was the passionate woman whose flames were warmth to those she protected and a blazing inferno to all who earned her ire. I understand what you are trying to say, Amaterasu, and I agree with both you and Tsukuyomi. Itachi said. Remembering how scathing Amaterasu was to him when they met and how Tsukuyomi was mostly observant of his choices, Itachi gained another understanding of the nature of what they were. Amaterasu had said his ambition and goals fueled her flames, while Tsukuyomi had acted as his mirror of truth since the beginning, letting Itachi know that the two of them were unshakable ideals of his soul. An anchor to keep him rooted to his path. Honestly, they felt more like his guardians and caretakers' parents if he were to be extreme. Tachi. He caught the pink missile that jumped at him with a smile, one that seemed to grow wider after staring at him for a second. I finally found you, Squirt. A shadow radiating pure battle intensity loomed behind him. Oh? Your Ryutsu also grew stronger. That's it, you're fighting me whether you like it or not. Captain Zaraki Itachi stepped back and pulled Yachiru behind him to dodge the wild swing from a smiling Kenpeki. You almost cut her. He knew the extreme ways of soul society, especially that of the 11th where death was a normal occurrence, but Kenny wasn't trying to cut me. He was trying to cut you, Tachi. The girl laughed as she held his neck. Keep him still for me, Yachiru. I'll cut him up very nicely. Kenpeki said and swung his sword at Itachi, but Itachi simply faded away. An illusion like last time. Kenny, over here. He laughed hard and took off in Yachiru's direction. Good job, Yachiru. Chapter 61, Chapter 60, Fighting Kenpeki I. They say you take your personality to the grave. Well, I've already died once. I intend to honor it. Itachi Uchiha. Itachi sighed at the girl dangling happily around his neck. And though he tried to understand her, all he could see was just a child that loved hanging around Zaraki Kenpeki. This is just perfect, Itachi. What do you mean by that, Amaterasu? He asked, stopping briefly atop a roof near the 7th Division. That woman was quite strong, stubborn too, but she couldn't ever beat me in my own realm, so that doesn't count. But this oaf is the perfect opportunity for us to burn darker. He's also quite fast. I don't think I've ever seen him use any technique. Zaraki Kenpeki an enigma even amongst captains. Oh, are you finally going to fight Kenny, Tachi? Yay, she exclaimed cheerfully. Hurry up, Kenny. He wants to fight. He felt the intensity of Kenpeki's Ryutsu grow stronger, likely having heard Yachiru's words. Itachi was never one to enjoy the prospect of battles, fights or even disputes of any kind, but meeting Amaterasu let him know that always avoiding these things weakened her flames. Peaceful resolution was always the best choice, Tsukuyomi would agree, but violence was necessary if it didn't work, as Amaterasu would agree. Stepping back, Itachi employed Shunpo this time and led the grinning Kenpeki outside the gates of the Seireitei. Aizen and a few Shinigami were making their way past the southern red hollow gates of the Seireitei along with their captain, Hirako Shinji, when a few of them felt Itachi run past them. They didn't pay much attention to that but had to reconsider when Kenpeki rushed past them with a grin and his chaotic Ryutsu knocking out the weaker Shinigami. Captain Hirako. That's amusing for a few reasons. Shinji smiled airily. Kenpeki will give up if his opponent keeps running away from him. He was midway with waving off Aizen's concern when they felt the faint collision of Ryutsu. You were saying. Don't be smug with me, Aizen-ya. He said before leaving with Shunpo. You guys can go on ahead, and take those knocked out to the fourth. Aizen said before following his captain. He was also surprised at the higher level of attack as Ryutsu as he drew closer to where they were. A natural genius. But sadly, that's all there is to it. Flowing and leaving came and went his wistful thoughts, also a little expectant on seeing Itachi's Zanpakuto in action. Stopping at a spot he thought was a considerable distance, he unhooked the child around his neck and set her on the ground. Best to step back, Lieutenant Yachiru. This might be dangerous for you if you're near. He said. Even if she was a child, he still gave her the basic respect of addressing her with her title. Just call me Yachiru, Tachi, since we're friends now. Friends? Of course we're friends. You're not running away, which makes Kenny happy. And I'm happy if Kenny is happy. I see. Then Yachiru, mind stepping back? He calmly unsheathed his blade from its black sheath and turned around to block Kenpeki's sword, meeting the grinning visage of the man with his neutral one. Good. Good. Your Ryutsu tells me you can cut me. Kenpeki retrieved his unnaturally chipped-edged long sword and started swinging wildly at Itachi, but show me how deep. A/N, most people overlook this simple fact that was clearly shown, but Kenpeki is one of the best swordsmen in the Bleach verse. Easily top 5 if not top 3. He defeated Anohana, who is stated to be unparalleled in her swordsmanship when he was a child, and yes, he sealed his power in the process, but that doesn't or shouldn't make him suddenly weak. But his fight with Ichigo, straight face, I blame Kubo. At this time, Kenpeki is still recently new to the Seireitei and it hasn't been long since he became a captain, so a century of not fighting anybody strong hasn't dulled his blade all that much. He killed a captain quite easily after all. Itachi evaded and parried another wild swing, but this time with a frown. Immense spiritual and physical strength but no skill. And yet, Itachi quickly realized just how crazy Kenpeki was and why everyone stayed away from him. All the man cared about was killing him first, nothing else mattered. Not his opponent cutting him or his life. And they called Haiden a madman. Come on. Stop dodging and fight back. Kenpeki said with an angry expression on his face. Itachi. I hear you. Kenpeki smiled as he saw Itachi finally looking serious. Itachi held the blade's edge in his hand and slowly drew out the blade, drawing blood with his actions. Consume all, Zenbushi, Amaterasu, the undying flame of a desolate world. He released Amaterasu for the first time, and as soon as he did, he felt something burning inside him. It wasn't the heat of flames but something more intense. The passion of flames. The release command for Amaterasu caused the blood on the blade to turn black, which then turned into small black flames that swallowed the whole sword and turned it pitch black. Is that your Shikai? I thought it was something else. Kenpeki was confused, but a second was all it took for him to realize that it didn't matter. It doesn't matter. Now come and cut me. Are you not going to use yours? Itachi asked. Was he also like your Yuaki? Or did he feel he could take him on without his Shikai? Oh, my blade doesn't have any of the fancy names or forms yours do. It's just a blade for killing. Nothing more, nothing less. Kenpeki had grown tired of the pointless talks and attacked with as much careless abandon as he always did, but Itachi was more than ready. If he doesn't care for his sword, then do him a favor and burn it. He heard his flames say, but he reminded himself to be careful. Unlike Sasuke, he had absolutely no control of Amaterasu, and this would be his first attempt to do so. His sword clashed with Kenpeki's, and for the first time, Kenpeki's grin faltered and he immediately took a step back. That blade of yours is weird. Fascinating. His grin returned, but initially he had been confused as to why he would retreat, but grinned as he realized that it might mean that Itachi could kill him. Itachi, however, discovered something. It can burn Ryutsu too. Slower than it does chakra, but it burns it still. Unlike ninjas, as soul beings, Shinigami were naturally covered in their Ryutsu, which meant that to kill them, you had to be able to get through it. Of course I can burn it. There's nothing I can't burn, but that depends on you. To stoke the undying flames with his passion. The blade in Itachi's hands ignited in black flames that the spectators quickly realized wasn't emitting any heat. So that's it, hey. It was burning away the Ryutsu around my sword. Kenpei noted smilingly as he took off his eye patch. The brat was more than capable of withstanding his intensity. His already enormous Ryutsu skyrocketed and covered him in a golden haze of pure spiritual pressure, contrasting the black haze that was flowing around Itachi. They both ran at each other and clashed again and again. Black haze! Kenny! Yachiru screamed as a plume of black flames almost covered Kenpei, who was lucky to have retreated when he did. He was no longer smiling, only looking warily at the black flames as something within him actually reacted to danger, especially whenever his sword met Itachi's. This is tiring to use consistently. Itachi thought. Of course it would. You've barely ever used my flames, and it is originally only meant for when you unlocked your Bankai or Manjiki. He had barely used it extensively, and yet he was already feeling the drain it was causing him. He had been careful enough not to mistakenly kill Kenpei with a cut, but holding back while trying to maintain constant control of the flames was taxing to an inhumane degree. That's enough for now. He wholeheartedly agreed with her on that. Now you know just how much you've severely handicapped yourself. He nodded. He knew firsthand just how much more dangerous the flames could be if he trained to master them, but he also knew that they were ways to stop the flames, and he knew Amaterasu knew that too. Sealing was one way, which meant Bakud was valid. At least the sealing spells on the top tiers. Dodging them too, but that was obvious, even if not everyone could. The faster captains, he thought, could dodge them, especially if they were expecting it. Another way, and the most dangerous, was concentrating a very huge amount of energy on the point of impact and being fast enough to escape in the instant before it burned through it. Itachi cancelled his Amaterasu release, much to Kenpei's surprise. Is that it? Are you done? He asked, already getting irritated. Itachi felt that was enough, especially since he had been fighting Yuryuki less than an hour ago and he was extremely tired. Almost, but no. He sheathed Amaterasu and pulled out Tsukuyomi, confusing the hell out of Kenpei. You have 2 Zanpakuto. Yes. Now, let's continue, Terrace, Tsukuyomi. Chapter 62, Chapter 61, Fighting Kenpei 2. There's no right way or wrong way to fight in a battle. Itachi Uchiha. Degree. Aizen and Shinji watched with surprised and gobsmacked expressions on their respective faces as they saw Itachi fight Kenpei with a shikai that they weren't aware he had. You don't say. A dual Zanpakuto wielder? That's rare, I tell ya. Shinji was truly surprised by this because he remembered that he'd never seen Itachi with 2 swords on his hips, except now, that is. It truly is surprising. Sometimes it's hard not to envy geniuses like him. Shinji's reaction to Aizen's words were only a raised brow as he nonchalantly gave a shrug. It's none special, you know. He narrowed his eyes on the black flames that flickered on Itachi's sword and those on the ground. They're not burning anything. Those flames. They ain't normal. He saw Itachi summoning a plume of it, and yet, they're not burning anything. Not even charring the ground. You're absolutely right. Aizen said while adjusting his glasses as he focused intently on the black flames. Maybe it only burns Ryutsu. He tried speaking his observation, but Shinji shot it down immediately. If it only burns Ryutsu, then Kenpei never would have retreated. He wouldn't even care about it. Silently he made his way towards where Yachiru was watching the battle from and spooked her from behind. Heya, Lil Yachi. Smiley. Glasses. Were you both watching too? Yeah. Quite a surprise, I'll admit. They watched as Itachi sheathed his back blade and drew the other one and activated his shikai, at least the one they were familiar with. He really has 2 Zanpakuto and he can release them separately. Aizen said. Shinji looked at Yachiru, who was staring intently at the battle going off in the distance, and asked. Worried Lil Yachi? She shook her head strongly. Kenny will win. Itachi was getting really tired at this point, but Kenpei was like a wildly charging bull, swinging and slashing in any way. He has a very keen survival instinct, but it's like he doesn't care about it at all. Itachi realized that about Kenpei as they fought. The man could react to most of Itachi's attacks, but it was like he didn't care a dime about listening to it. Itachi's head was throbbing at this point and his vision was getting blurry from his extensive use of it in his fight with Yoriuaki and then with Amaterasu and Tsukuyomi again against Kenpeki. He blocked a slash from Kenpeki, but the man just pushed forward, causing Itachi to take the chance and detach from him and slashed him across the chest. "These illusions of yours are really annoying, but I'm getting used to them," Kenpeki said, gaining Itachi's attention along with his skepticism. Kenpeki had almost no control of his enormous Ryutsu, a chipped blade and no Shikai, and he said he was getting used to them. "I really should have stopped when I could," Itachi thought in retrospect as he hastily blocked another blade only to have Kenpeki sock him across the face. His Sharingan was helping him, but he was both physically and mentally tired, which made his reaction very slow. He attacked Kenpeki and shifted his perception of him by a fair bit, which should have sent Kenpeki's attack veering off to an empty space and left him open for Itachi to attack, but Kenpeki suddenly turned at the last second and blocked Itachi's sword. "I told you, ha ha ha. I'm getting used to it." He grinned as his blade cut through and out of Itachi's flesh. The sensation of cutting someone's flesh was the best thing he's ever felt in his life. "You have that look on your face, the one that keeps asking how I saw through your abilities." He laughed while pointing his sword at Itachi. "You're not the first person I've fought that can use illusions, although he wasn't as strong or impressive as you." "That doesn't explain anything," Itachi replied. It didn't matter to him that much, but he wanted to know how Kenpeki did it without manipulating his Ryutsu. How should I know?" Kenpeki said. "Just because you can manipulate my senses doesn't mean I can't feel you trying to cut me. It's just that simple." He could feel it. Itachi thought, flabbergasted. He could manipulate the senses with illusions, but he couldn't manipulate someone's feelings in the same way. Of course he'd be a monster. His extreme views about fights have turned him into the most perfect killer. Itachi thought as he remembered why he had been wary of Kenpeki since the beginning. "You only pushed him back because he was careful of my flames and must have felt the danger from them. And I'm sure you can tell from how stable his Ryutsu still is that he probably was holding back, or perhaps being held back." The man before him was an ocean of Ryutsu, but he only used a fraction of it, and using his Sharingan he could tell that even when Kenpeki removed his eye patch, he still wasn't fighting with everything, he had just an extremely limited portion of it. "As if he was holding back to match me." Itachi was floored by the conclusion that thinking from this angle suddenly made sense. This was the man, along with the Captain Commander and Kisuke Urahara, that his eyes showed him he possessed a spiritual pressure that surpassed even that of the nine-tailed beast. "Did you now realize it, Itachi?" he heard Tsukuyomi asking. "Ryutsu might not be everything, just as the way chakra level doesn't correlate to a shinobi's strength, but that's below a certain level. Rather than the amount, learn to feel the weight it carries." Itachi nodded and thanked Tsukuyomi mentally. Amaterasu might be strong, perhaps one of the strongest abilities even among souls, but finally obtaining it and barely being able to wield it did not equal that he was now incredibly strong. "This was a good fight, but you should train more so I can enjoy the fight more," Kenpeki suddenly said as his battle intent receded. He looked at Itachi, who was sighing in relief, and rolled his eyes. "Fighting someone when they are extremely tired is no fun. Try using those flames of yours next time we fight, it'll make it more interesting when I figure out how to cut them." He was already turning around to leave when he remembered that he didn't know the name of the boy he just fought. "Oi brat, you're strong, so tell me your name." "Itachi." "Uchiha." Itachi replied with visibly labored breaths as he deactivated Tsukuyomi and felt the full brunt of his exhaustion. "Oh, now I remember." He did remember Yachiru shouting his name whenever they looked for him. "Yachiru, we're leaving." Yachiru employed her shunpo and appeared on his shoulder as he walked away, speaking animatedly with him while the older grumpy man responded leisurely to her excitable words. "At least he left you before beating you half to death. At least that's what I hear he does to his division members whenever he's bored." Shinji and Aizen appeared behind him, making him aware that they were probably spectating the fight from the beginning. "Yeah, pretty good in the way you fight." Shinji complimented him while smiling in a way that was hard to read. "Especially against someone like Zaraki. How about it? Need a hand getting to the hospital?" "Thank you, but I'm strong enough to walk back." He appreciated the offer but declined it nonetheless while Shinji waved his hand dismissively. "If you say so," he replied before leaving Aizen with Itachi. "Are you sure you're alright? I might not be that skilled in it, but I know a few basic kaide." Aizen offered, but Itachi still declined his kind offer. "I'm fine. I need more rest than healing." "I see." Then take care. Aizen said before disappearing as well, leaving Itachi to use the time he spent in slowly trudging back to the Siraidii to converse with his Zanpakuto spirits. Growing stronger doesn't mean other people grow weaker. Just because your convictions will fuel her flames doesn't mean you should be as intense as her. Be mindful of how close you dance to the flames, lest you get burned. I understand, Tsukuyomi. You do, don't you? Then relax for a moment, take heart. Life is a journey that can only be traveled with time, and time reveals our growth as we continuously travel the journey of life. Essentially, he shouldn't be in a hurry to gain the comfort of the strength of his former life so fast. Yes, having Amaterasu meant he'd finally unlocked his growth curve, but even that will take time. The walk back was peaceful and quiet with neither of them saying too much. Tsukuyomi was concerned about his mental peace, Amaterasu was passionate about making him grow stronger, while Itachi was just relieved to have them both the only semblance of a real connection he had with past life. Chapter 63, Chapter 62, Disillusioned Pawns. Pain is pain, call it what you will. Do you feel it any less deeply by thinking it's not real? Itachi Uchiha. Degree. In a dark room filled with monitors that showed different strings of data, Aizen looked with intense focus as his eyes greedily read through all the data reports he had been able to get his hands on. Kisukura-hara. I commend your intelligence, for it truly is a frightening thing, enough to make me extremely cautious. He said with what was almost an admiring voice. Nothing truly is new under the sun, because just like me, you're looking for a way to break through the soul's natural ceiling. A pity that was where their similarities end, because while he, Aizen, was resolute in taking his research further and experimenting on different types of souls and hollows, Kisukura-hara limited himself with his self-imposed morals. But I sincerely pray for your success. Because what better gift for a god than the seed of his ascension? He couldn't wait. While everyone went about dumbly, he went ahead and started assigning them as pieces in a chessboard. Even the famed genius that was Kisukura-hara was a piece in his board. A bigger and important piece, but a chess piece nonetheless. He walked to a corner of the room and brought out a small box. He opened it and took out what was inside, a crystalline shell with what looked to be a purple flame inside it. He had tried creating something that'd erase the boundary between Shinigami and hollows, though incomplete. He was successful in creating the tool which was the culmination of his desires, the Hugyaku. He had tried perfecting it over the years, but he wasn't successful, but that was before Kisuke started threading on the same path he'd walked on and started creating a Hugyaku of his own, and that was when Aizen saw the completion of his goal. He needed Kisuke's Hugyaku to make his complete, and he was determined to get it no matter what. Itachi woke up silently, with his only movement being after he had looked over the room to confirm where he was. Looking under his shirt, he sighed in relief that his wounds were finally healed up. Despite his words that day, he had gone to the 4th Division to get healed from the wounds he sustained from fighting Kenpeki, something that earned him one of the most blangest stares he had ever received, courtesy of Anohana. It hadn't been that long, but the quick change he noticed after his fight was that the child lieutenant of the 11th was at his doors the very next morning. She had arrived when he was about to have his breakfast, something he rarely ever bothered with these days, but had to because of how tired and injured he was the previous day, and had agreed to join him for breakfast when he had politely asked. He hadn't come across Kenpeki ever since then, but Yachiru was almost a constant in his house every day. It was easy to see how Itachi was gradually changing in his time away from everyone and everything that held him attached to his shinobi life. He hadn't forgiven himself for what he did to his family, not by a long shot, but he had grown up to accept these as things that he did, not what the village did. Walking into his small kitchen, he started his day with making a simple breakfast, but did so with 2 portions. Yachiru managed to get him to intentionally cook for someone else, something he hadn't done since he was a child. The last time he could do something like this so freely was the few times he cooked for Sasuke or their family, before the missions and village secrets took away all the time he had. He kept her portion aside before he left, since it was possible she could drop by when he wasn't around. As for locking his doors, he saw no reason to when he literally had nothing of value in there. Stepping inside the gate of his division, he came across Kisuke, who was just leaving. "Ah, Itachi. How goes it?" "Urahara. Serious as always, I see," Kisuke said with an easygoing smile. "Oh, and if you're looking for your Yuaki, she's not in." With that he bid his goodbye and walked away. Since your Yuaki was not in, he made a beeline to the private ground behind her office, where he could feel Swafon's Ryutsu, most likely training. He didn't disturb her, just settling on sitting idle to meditate and pass the time. Swoosh! He caught a blade between his hands and proceeded to give Swaifon a look, threw the blade back and said nothing else. I thought it was someone else. She gave a simple excuse knowing that none of them cared much about the knife. Are you waiting for Lady Yuryuki? He nodded and said nothing else, but it seemed Swaifon had other ideas. Mind a spar to pass the time? She asked, causing him to open his eyes to look at her. She was very diligent in her training, using most of her free time in training than in anything else. He agreed since they both had nothing to do and drew out Tsukuyomi since it was the shorter of both blades, while Swaifon drew hers. The 4th Division. Inside Anohana's office, she and her lieutenant, Isane, were playing a board game when the doors were swung wide open by a short pink head. Ri-chan. Katechin. Isane sighed dramatically while Anohana merely smiled fondly at the little lieutenant. Stop barging into places like that, Yachiru. It would have been better if you just came in through the window like you normally do. Isane chided half-heartedly, more focused on the game she was playing against Anohana than the interruption. Good to see you in high spirits like always, Yachiru. Anohana said fondly as Yachiru joined them at the table holding something in her hands. Is that a food box? Isane asked, to which Yachiru nodded happily as she opened it. Normally she preferred sweets to anything, still do, but she also enjoyed these. Tachi made it for me. Tachi. Do you mean Itachi from the second? Yachiru nodded at Anohana while stuffing her mouth. He and Kenny became friends and he's a good cook. Here. She stuffed the chopsticks inside Isane's mouth before she could refuse. See. I see. And Kenny said he wants to fight him again because Tachi was tired the first time. She looked serious for a moment as she pursed her lips while tapping them with her chopsticks. Tachi is really strong though. Especially with his second Zanpakuto. Finally swallowing the admittedly tasty food shoved into her mouth, Isane could now finally speak. What's his second Zanpakuto abilities? She asked curiously. It's a fire type like Gramps, but it's black and it's not hot. It isn't hot? Maybe it's not exactly fire but something else. She conjectured, but Yachiru shook her head. It's not hot but it burns. It burned Kenny's Ryatsuo and made him retreat a couple times. She said with a heavy nod as if convincing herself that what she said was the right thing. Isane was surprised but not that much. The man in question had fought Captain Shiba and Captain Yuryuki, who he brought to the ward a few days ago. Anohana was of the same thought. Kenpeki wasn't who he once was, so that was understandable. What she was however interested in was the black flames that Yachiru said could burn Ryatsuo, but she didn't know much about it. Illusions and flames that burn Ryatsuo? I can't see the connection. Shouldn't twin spirits have at least some connection in their abilities? Isane asked her captain. Anohana calmly drank her tea and moved her piece on the board game as she replied. 2 out of thousands in over 1,000 years can barely be considered a reliable metric to make a correct judgment on the nature on dual spirit Zanpakuto. Isane nodded and they both got back to their game while Yachiru happily ate beside them, having pulled out her snack bag from somewhere when none of them were looking. I thought you were leaving him be? Jin asked with his trademark smile as he walked behind Aizen. A variable that cannot be accounted for is an error. His illusions aside, him being a dual Zanpakuto wielder and the nature of those flames are interesting topics to study. Aizen replied with a genial expression that was masterfully worn on his face. And besides, I am yet to find out what kind of piece he is, so this will help me know where to place him on the board. You're the boss man, Vice. Jin's smile stretched a bit as he said that. So got anything interesting for your new toy? Aizen glanced at Jin, who had a predatory grin on his face, smiled himself but said nothing in answer to Jin's question. Chapter 64, Chapter 63, Burn and Reveal, Truth Seeker. Self-sacrifice. A nameless shinobi who protects peace within its shadow. That is a true shinobi. Itachi Uchiha. Degree. Shin Academy. Finally, I thought the class was never going to end. The third-year students sighed and clamored around after the instructor left the class. Since that's our last class for the day, is anyone up for some fun? A resounding chorus of positive replies rang out and the class was immediately separated into groups. Hey, Junpei? You coming or what? Someone called out as they saw Junpei quietly leaving the class. No, not today. Junpei said and left, leaving the group surprised. What's up with him lately? Someone asked. Like hell if I know. I hear he's been training like hell recently cause he wants to graduate this year. A girl informed and another one added. I think he wants to join the second division, at least that's what he said. A joint specialized division? With how bad he is at Zanjutsu and Hakuta, I'll be more surprised if he passes this year's evaluation. Someone scoffed and the whole group laughed. Itachi frowned as he went over the report that was sent to him from Murayuki. One about some rogue Shinigami. While he understood that this was the type of missions the division was specialized in, this was however the first time Murayuki was giving him one of this nature. To him, the brand of rogue is a very distinct and complicated status that rarely ever tell the true reason why one was branded a rogue. Are you going alone? Yes. Those were the only words he exchanged with Swafon after she delivered the memo from Murayuki. Even she could tell that he had conflicted feelings about it, but she said nothing. And he also didn't mention that his actions would be based on what he found out from the so-called rogues. Stepping through the Senkaimon into the human world, Itachi felt the familiar shackling ceiling appearing on his hand, but he wasn't in the mood to express his displeasure with it. You're still thinking if there is a particular reason why she gave you this chore, aren't you? We are about to find out. The rogues as it was were hiding under the effect of a concealing kid spell which actually made it easier for Itachi to find them. Something isn't right. He heard Amaterasu say and slightly nodded his head. Rogues weren't a new thing in Soul Society, but most of the time they just seemed to hide away and only few bothered with staging a rebellion or going after other Shinigami like these one did. From the feel of these kid, they are probably in their 50s. Tsukuyomi commented after getting a feel from the barrier. If they were this competent they shouldn't have been easy to find. True, but it's not like most know about the Sharingan. Drawing out his black sword, Itachi stabbed it into a spot and the kid barrier became visible. Head number 63, Rake. Yellow lightning traveled through the blade and ran amok across the entire barrier and crumbled it into motes of light. Are you sure about this, Itachi? I am no one's attack dog, Tsukuyomi. I'll hear what they have to say first. Itachi felt the numerous presence hiding around him, or at least trying to, but showed no reaction as he walked through the dark underground tunnel system, saying nothing until he got to the wide opening in the middle of it where he felt the strongest Ryutsu waiting. Have the Shinigami finally come to get us? The middle-aged man that was sitting on what seemed to a throne carved from stone regarded Itachi as he walked in. I'd like to talk first if that's possible. Mostly about your misgivings about the Soul Society. The silence between them stretched before the man burst out into a hilarious laughing fit. Do you hear that, guys? Mr. Shinigami here wants to talk. A bit late that, ain't it? A lanky man said, rolling his eyes as he came and stood beside the man sitting on the throne. From what I understand, you're from a fallen noble family that rebelled because you disagreed with how the Siraidii was ruled. I just want to know your reasons. There's no need. We don't need you to sympathize with us. As long as we get the power we want, even the captains and the vaunted Squad Zero will fall. Their leader gave a hollow smile that sent the rest of the rogues inside the room into motion. The first one that got to Itachi was grinning as he attempted to stab him through from the back. Well, he succeeded, but it wasn't Itachi he stabbed. Is that it? Only power? Itachi asked, frowning while still appearing as if he never moved. Power is everything. That is why the old man still leads the Godai 13 after 1,000 years. His face was serious as he saw one of his people sliding dead to the ground after one just killed him. I didn't do that. The rogue who just killed his comrade shouted in panic as everyone's eyes were now moving between him and Itachi. The leader was about to say something but was shaken as the space between him and Itachi was erased with a shimmer and the Shinigami was now standing mere meters from his face. Now tell me, why did you rebel? Instead of an answer, the man drew his blade and skewered Itachi through with a nasty smile that turned into a frown when he saw Itachi not reacting at all, merely pointing behind him. You're being influenced. An illusion. The moment he tried influencing the man to answer his questions, he and Tsukuyomi immediately felt the influence of another illusion on the man. Itachi. I felt it too. With how attuned he now was with Tsukuyomi, he felt the change in everyone's mind as if whatever was in their leader's mind suddenly came alive in theirs too. So someone is controlling you. Good to know. They all sprang into action the moment he figured out the influence on their leader, well, all of them from the looks of it. It seems to have broken my initial illusion too. He noticed. How quaint. To send puppets on illusionary strings against us. Tsukuyomi chuckled on one of the rarest moments Itachi has ever seen him show genuine emotions. Yes. Tsukuyomi has someone to compare against, and I have that Captain Shiba and the old head captain. What are you waiting for, Itachi? Itachi looked around at the group of rogues fighting themselves. With his Sharingan, he could easily put them in another illusion that didn't go against the one they were already in, and as for removing it, it's not impossible. Tsukuyomi started, sounding even impressed. This illusion is complete, in that it completely traps the victim in its illusion and blocks all 6 of their senses from outside influence. Itachi grabbed the leader while the others were busy fighting themselves and stared into the man's eyes with his Sharingan. Normal ways of breaking out of an illusion won't do it since it completely covers their Ryutsu manipulation. Accept it or not, but your illusions aren't complete in the true sense of the word, as there are ways to bypass it. Your manipulation of illusions is unearthly, but it isn't truly complete. So my control against their power? Just like with Kenpeki. Itachi was unfazed by Tsukuyomi's words, instead started using his illusions to overlap with what the foreign illusion was making them see. If the illusion was warping what they saw, Itachi's illusion was warping the area around them, like 2 incomplete opaque objects joining together to create one full picture. Using Truth Seeker would have been easier. Tsukuyomi said blandly as he saw what Itachi did. It was the perfect antithesis to countering illusions just like these. True, but there's no reason to go that far. And besides, I don't know if anyone is watching. At that moment, the underground cave started rumbling, making Itachi look above where he could see multiple discordant Ryutsu. Why are hollows here? As if expecting something, he pulled out his communicator and tried contacting the research division, but nothing went through. Just like that time. He no longer bothered with the rogues and, a wrong decision, and went above to see what was happening. This is obviously the work of a hollow bait. Meaning the puppeteer is nearby. Tsukuyomi said. And that they are specifically targeting you. Amaterasu pointed out. They might have singled me out because of my illusions and the theory that it could stop theirs even despite me staying low and reducing my presence in the Godi I-13. That's what you get for hiding behind facades, prodding and manipulation. Amaterasu scoffed in displeasure. A fierce flame doesn't fear burning itself. The fear belongs to those who come near it. I guess what she's trying to say, Itachi, is stop hiding your capabilities, and I agree with her. The moon never hides its shine. Considering a setup like this is mostly to kill me or draw out the extent of my abilities, I see no reason to keep being covered. He pulled out both of his blades and held their hilt together. Kagasu to Sarekuru, Hanshin. Burn and reveal, Truth Seeker. A haze of red clouds and black flames erupted from both blades and engulfed him. Chapter 65, Chapter 64, Basis for Trust 4. Time doesn't heal anything, it just teaches us how to live with pain. Itachi Uchiha. Degree. Aizen watched fascinated as Itachi released what looked like his Shikai's true form. He was watching it through an autonomous device because he knew he couldn't take any chances. If anything from Itachi's fight with Kenpeki revealed anything, then it was that no one knew the limits or nature of his abilities. Hanshin Truth Seeker. How ironic. He didn't know how Itachi did it, but he knew someone had managed to subvert his illusions. Even Kaika Suijutsu said as much. Show it to me, Itachi. Show me the limit of a genius. He smiled to himself. These hollows were the bait, the real tests were on their way. World of the living. How do you feel? Tsukuyomi and Amaterasu's voices seemed to overlap as they spoke to him, but he could still hear each one clearly. Like I'm not about to faint. And I don't have to worry about holding back. He looked at the incoming swarm of hollows and held the shortened dual blade lazily to the side. I wonder, what truth will this battle show me? He was never one to rely on expressive displays of power, but it was time for that to change. Itachi of the Sharingan might have been a moniker he gained mainly for his expert use of the Sharingan and illusions, but that was about to change. His robe blew with the wind, and from its spluttering edges rose small wicks of black flames that flew and divided themselves until there were dozens of them surrounding him. He could already see the offset of charging Zeros from the horde of hollows, but he disregarded it and focused only on what he was doing. Power and control. I've never lacked those, but this is new territory. Controlling Amaterasu was something he had never been able to do. The flames trembled and started taking shape. With Truth Seeker, he could always subvert his control of Tsukuyomi for Amaterasu's flames than doing it himself, and likewise he could use Amaterasu's raw power for Tsukuyomi. So that's why he said I should have used Truth Seeker instead. The flames caught and crowed, turning into crows with red glowing eyes. The tall Minos Grande released their Siros and right at the same time Itachi released his crows of flames. Anton, Kagutsuki. Inferno style, flame control. Along with his crows, Itachi's form scattered about and rushed at the hollows who were suddenly confused at the surprising turn of events but not for long as they started screeching when the crows hit them on their face and set their bony mask on fire. I had no idea controlling Amaterasu could be this dangerous. Itachi muttered as his body slowly came together as he watched the black cloud that was slowly consuming all the hollows. I could have done it with less power without this seal. Amaterasu scoffed in extreme displeasure. We're not done yet. It seems our watchers are a lot more subtle than I thought. The bludgeoning spiritual pressure he could feel coming from below was slowly rising. And still no notification from the Soul Society. I'm slowly doubting the capabilities of the Shinigami divisions, especially the 12th and Kid division. The ground below them crumbled and formed a small valley from which 5 strange hollows appeared. Strange because he could sense both hollow and Shinigami Ryutsu from them. Seeing these chaotic amalgamations reminded him of a certain serpentine man whom he loathed more than anyone. Twirling Truth Seeker around his fingers, Itachi analyzed the hollows and frowned when he saw that the chaotic and neutral energy inside them were eating themselves up, burning it to an intense blaze as it were. You seem triggered. Amaterasu pointed out. We're finding out whoever is doing this and stopping them. Irrespective of the Shinigami rules. One of the crazed hollows that felt even above the normal Ajichas rushed at him, followed closely by the others, but Itachi kept staring at how their Ryutsu basically devoured itself. It felt wrong even looking at it. The hollow was moments before hitting him when the clouds on Itachi's robe seemed to move and all the hollows stopped. With no sensation of what direction to move in, the crazed hollows who lacked simple rationality just stopped and presented themselves for Itachi to slice through their masks and watch them combust into flames. Knowing when to switch between power and control, even I can't say anything against it. Amaterasu praised in an impressed tone. Aizen watched with a serious expression on his face as he watched Itachi easily deal with the horde of hollows and even the base experiments he had to set loose. Those flames. What are they? This was no longer just passing interest, he really had to know. Isshin Shiba and head captain Yamamoto were already dangerous in their own rights as Shinigami with flame-type Zanpakuto, but there was a very stark difference between their flames and Itachi's. Isshin's flames burned, head captain Yamamoto's was power itself, all-encompassing and all-consuming like the sun, a blade without equal. Itachi's however wasn't as intense or consuming like Isshin's or Yamamoto's, instead it looked as if it swallowed and ate them. No flare, no conflagration, just erasing everything at once. I see. You're not like the others then. Maybe the 1%, but that wouldn't mean anything in time. He waited for an hour in the world of the living before he could contact the Soul Society, and before he could even do that, he saw a Senkaimon open and out of it came Yoryuki and Swafon with a few Shinigami behind them. Attack! Clang! Everyone gasped as Itachi attacked Yoryuki out of nowhere and immediately went on their guard and surrounded the both of them. Explain Yoryuki, he said and pushed his blade against hers when she tried saying something with a smile on her face. And choose your words carefully. My patience for your frivolities are currently non-existent. Would you believe me if I said I had no idea about that mission? Boom! Yoryuki was shot away as a silent kid was released through Itachi's blade and exploded in her face. Third seat Itachi. Cease your attack immediately. You're under arrest. Swafon said with a grim look on her face, but Itachi simply ignored her as his form shimmered away and appeared where Yoryuki was crawling out of the rubble she created. That bad hey! She said, but this time there was no smile on her face. She threw away her cloak and held her blade in front of her in case Itachi persisted in attacking. I didn't send anything. Not a mission or even an order for you, especially not one for rogues. She gritted her teeth as Itachi's blade came down on hers and cracked the ground beneath them. This was a difference he never had. She cursed as she saw another Senkaimon open up and out came Shinji and his lieutenant, Aizen. Itachi, listen, don't escalate this and just listen, please. I never sent that mission. It came with your seal, Yoryuki. Itachi pressed on. Oya? How ya doing, Yoryuki? And third seat Itachi, mind stepping back? And reseal your shikai while at it. Shinji greeted and ordered with a low smile. Behind him, Aizen had already drawn his sword while looking reluctant and resolute. Itachi, please explain what is going on. He begged. While all this happened around them, Yoryuki and Itachi's eyes never left the other. This is the second time. I know. It could have been someone from the division. Yoryuki's eyes were both serious and furious at the statement she was forced to make and accept. That has access to your seal and the secrecy between you and Swa-Fon? You shouldn't let me point out your incompetence again, Yoryuki. By this time, all the Shinigami were surrounding them, but Shinji stopped them from taking any action as a closer look showed that Yoryuki knew what was happening and was accepting of the altercation happening. Hell, he'd even go and say she looked a bit guilty and hellishly furious. This was a look he hadn't seen in her since the last war. You're going overboard with your words, Itachi. She said with more bite in her tone that she would have liked, but she couldn't as he just put her competency in question. And for the first time since meeting Itachi, Yoryuki and Swa-Fon saw genuine anger in his eyes. Raw genuine anger that seemed no different from pure hatred, buried deep within his soul. Lightning came alive in his other hand but soon turned black as Amaterasu responded to his feelings and surged even higher. Yoryuki's eyes focused keenly on the black lightning on Itachi's hands, her instincts warning her against the attack. Someone from the Godai 13 is changing Shinigami to hollows and you think my words are harsh. Another Itachi said as he brought over a body and threw it at Shinji's feet. We'll have to take this back to examine it to verify your words and you'll have to come with us. Shinji said seriously as he stared at the half-destroyed corpse. The two people at odds said nothing in reply to Shinji and just looked at the other to see who would budge. Get Anohana here, Shinji. Yoryuki said, surprising not only Shinji but the other Shinigami around. Yoryuki, what are you? Get Anohana here, and if possible get Tensei too. Not just the best healer in Soul Society but also the Kid Corps' Grand Chief, Shinji understood immediately. Chapter 66, Chapter 65, A Traitor in Our Midst. No matter what darkness or contradictions lie within the village, I am still Itachi Uchiha of the Leaf. Itachi Uchiha. Degree. 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 Everyone stood in silence as they watched the captain in her third seat staring squarely at the other. Even if they didn't know exactly what was happening, just the fact that the captain was willing to let this play on let them know that it was more complicated than who was right or wrong. Another Senkaimon opened and when they looked up, everyone gulped, even Shinji looked uneasy, as three people stepped through. Their reaction was mainly because of the third person that came with Captain Anohana and Grand Chief Tensei. Head Captain Yamamoto has descended on the world of the living. Yoryuki, what is happening here? Everyone bristled at the phantom weight that fell on their shoulders as his words were pronounced. Turning to Yamamoto, without fully taking her eyes off Itachi, Yoryuki explained the bare bones of what she knew. Someone had given Itachi a mission with her seal, something both Swa-Fon and Itachi verified, except that was just the beginning of the downward spiral that they were now in. Captain Anohana, Grand Chief Tensei, examine the body and tell us what you can. After that, everyone is returning to the Soul Society. He stared at Itachi as he said that. He normally wouldn't listen to what Itachi had to say, at least until Itachi was standing before him in his office along with a panel of captains, but Yoryuki's acceptance of the current situation forced his hands. It might take a while, Head Captain. Tensei Tsukabishi, Kid Corps Grand Chief, said as Anohana first determined the state of the body before shaking her head. Yamamoto stared at the corpse under examination with no particular emotion on his face, but those attuned with their senses could tell that the old man was not happy in the slightest. In the meanwhile, drop your sword, boy. Itachi disengaged from Yoryuki. The lightning on his other hand flickered off while the flames simply entered his sleeves and kept billowing there. Head Captain. Anohana's expression looked severe as she regarded the corpse. Someone is trying to give Shinigami hollow powers. That, as far as we can tell, is the basis of whatever experiments this is. The execution then was most likely a sacrificial play. Yamamoto turned to Itachi, his back no longer hunched but ramrod straight. Tell me what happened, and for your sake do not miss a detail. Itachi's robes billowed fiercely as if expressing its displeasure to Yamamoto's words, causing the old man to snort and bang his cane on the ground. Whether he was sure of what he was doing or not, Itachi narrated what happened on the mission and got to where he mentioned them being under the influence of an illusion. An illusion, you say? Yamamoto said and glanced at Itachi's blade that was obviously different from what he remembered the young man wielding during his test. If you couldn't tell the appearance of my sword with a single illusion, why are you surprised that there might be others with illusion-type Zanpakuto and are hiding it? Itachi questioned back, to the surprise of the other Shinigami present. He could be passive if he wanted to, but not on this. Clearly whoever was observing him miscalculated quite a bit in the estimation of his strength, or else he would have been dead 2 times over. And then there was his own personal bias against traitors. Are you trying to say that a Shinigami fooled the Tsuridai, as well as I and the captains? Yamamoto asked slowly, causing some of the lower-level Shinigami to start sweating down their brows. Yes, was all Itachi could say. Whether he liked it or not, regardless of his reasons or feelings, he had willingly donned the Shiakush of a Shinigami. Make no mistake, he had no delusions about trying to fight everyone off if it came to it, but this was a situation where he had to stand on his beliefs. Tensei. Head Captain, I'm afraid there's little we can do here without extensive diagnosis. Tensei started but paused in hesitation in speaking his next words. Speak freely, Tensei. Head Captain, given the number of coincidences surrounding both incidents concerning Third Seat Itachi, there is a lot of credibility to his words. So it would seem. Yamamoto turned around and a Senkaimon appeared in front of him. We are leaving. Everyone gathered around Yamamoto except Yoryuki and Itachi, who found themselves in another stare-off that inadvertently increased the tension in the air. Don't make me repeat myself, Yamamoto said and walked into the Senkaimon with the other Shinigami. Seriously? Yoryuki chuckled as Itachi sheathed his sword and cancelled his shikai. You had me a bit worried there. The fact that you can somehow find a way to joke around it irks me, Yoryuki. Itachi said as they walked towards the Senkaimon. Yoryuki could only bitterly smile as she saw the cautious distance Itachi was keeping from her. You of all people should understand me and the basis of my reaction. I somehow expected something like this given the different powers at play in the Soul Society, but I wasn't expecting to be targeted like this, not this soon at least. They arrived in the Tsuridai at the same time to hear Yamamoto's displeased voice ordering an immediate captain's meeting, but this time it wasn't just limited to captains but also extended to their lieutenants and third seats. The captain's meeting this time around was way more tense than it had been for the century if the captains remembered correctly. Third seat Itachi, step forward and summarize what happened in your mission in the world of the living. The other people present who were just hearing this for the first time visibly expressed their shock and surprise with the way their jaws hung low by the time Itachi finished saying his piece. So you're saying that a Shinigami from one of the divisions with an illusion-type Zanpakuto did all this? I am saying that whoever was behind this has someone under them with an illusion-type Zanpakuto. Given how they could manipulate information in the 2nd and 12th Division, as well as the Kid Corps, at the same time shows that they have considerable influence in the divisions of the Godai 13. If before they were shocked, now they all wore completely aghast looks at what Itachi practically insinuated with the last sentence of his statement. Bold words there, young man, said Jinrei Kukaki. Bold it might be, but the evidence points that my words might as well be true, Itachi replied. And the truth is that someone in the Soul Society, inside the Godai 13, is experimenting with the souls of Shinigami and Hollows. The gathered captains and third seats frowned as they started getting a clue as to why they were called in attendance to this meeting. This wasn't about the importance of the matter at hand, well, not entirely, instead they were all here as potential suspects, and from the looks on some of the captains' faces, they were realizing the same thing too. Oh, so scary. Jin sounded in a mock scare. So did the captain's dice end slice up someone innocent? I don't think so, Jin. Aizen said with a thoughtful expression. It's already established that we are working with a group of people amongst our ranks, so maybe Kinyaro Tamori was just the fall guy. Someone to keep attention from being thrown their way. Aizen looked up and saw that half of the people in the room were either looking directly at him or were passively listening to him. He wanted to say something else but someone else beat him to it. You do realize that there's something that doesn't exactly fit with your whole conjecture, right? It was Kensei Magurama who expressed his doubts, earning some nods from the other captain. You get it, right? It doesn't matter how strong or complicated someone's Zanpakuto is, especially when it's something elusive like illusions, it is meaningless if they have a weaker Ryutsu than their target, so you saying that they probably fooled their captain or the captains means that they have a stronger Ryutsu than us, and you think we wouldn't notice something that obvious? Itachi didn't answer because he knew how that sounded himself. Even thinking about it felt unreal. Someone with more Ryutsu than the head captain, he didn't really believe that. The captains, Yoryuki even, could shake herself off his genjutsu because of her overwhelming Ryutsu. Even some of the other captains were quick to notice his illusion when he first used it. So someone not known. Maybe outside the Shinigami sphere so that his abilities won't be known? A member of the noble houses perhaps. Of course I wouldn't have all the answers. If I did, the nature of this meeting would have been different. But Tsukuyomi, Amaterasu. He slowly pulled out both of his blades under the careful scrutiny of the other captains, lieutenants and third seats. Chapter 67, Chapter 66, You've been compromised. Even if you don't want your youth to end, dreams must come to an end at some point. Itachi Uchiha. Degree. 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 Itachi slowly drew out his swords under the watchful gazes of everyone gathered, and they watched as both blades got covered in black flames and red fog before merging together to a dual white-black blade. Hey! A few of the lieutenants were confused at the sight of Itachi having another blade and a different Shikai altogether, but the captains were focused on another entirely. His Ryutsu. It's not bursting out like a usual release. Is it his control, or is it an illusion? And pray tell, what is the essence of this show of yours? Yamamoto asked, looking disinterestedly at Itachi's display. A point. Itachi replied succinctly. And that is. This is Hanshin, the truth seeker. He stretched the blade out for them to get a closer look. And one of its abilities is ensuring that its name remains true. He saw a few captains stealthily reaching for their blades but disregarded their actions. His mastery of Truth Seeker was still subpar at best, but thankfully he had two extremely cooperative Zanpakuto spirits along with the innate knowledge of his Zanpakuto abilities. And, forgive me for asking bluntly, but exactly do you want to do, Itachi? Aizen asked what was in most of the people's minds. I remember your Tsukuyomi ability being illusion-based. Does it also have a way to detect illusions? If it is active, yes, otherwise it would be the same as direct mind reading, and my Zanpakuto can't do that passively. Itachi replied, though some caught a certain word he said. Passively? So you can utilize it in a way to read minds? Anohana asked, the calm and compassionate cast on her face not betraying any thought going on in her head. Basically. Itachi didn't have any problem with saying this much because whether they knew or not didn't matter. I want to use it to determine if anyone here is under an illusion. The bubbling Ryutsu that was suffusing the air let Itachi know exactly what their thoughts were in this matter. So let me get this straight, you want to put us in an illusion and want us to cooperatively fall under its influence. That bout right. Shinji said with a dead stare at Itachi, the joke in his voice extinct from his eyes. Why are we even entertaining this? Love Akawa, captain of the 7th Division, asked with a dry tone. Whether or not he expected it, he was met with one of Itachi's deadest stares. It doesn't matter what you decide, they came after me, so that means I will continue regardless to look for them. All I'm offering is a way and a suggestion. Whatever you choose to do doesn't take away from the grave fact that the Godai 13 is infected with spies and traitors. The grim reminder, though unneeded, brought back the somber air in the room. What was it that drove Itachi to stand up like this and question the integrity of the Godai 13? He no longer had a place in the world of the living, and he couldn't spend an eternity wandering the Rukonga for nothing. If the Uchihas were here, then without a doubt they would have joined the Godai 13 as Shinigami. And the fame of the Uchiha wasn't exactly subtle once they started using their Sharingan. He was alone here, but that wasn't the life he wanted to live. It never was. Like Yoryuki had said on the day he became a Shinigami, it was his choice if he wanted this to be the closest thing to an answer or the home he was looking for. Well, we're not going anywhere with this. And no, I'm not talking about the ridiculousness of agreeing with the fact that an illusion could be trapping the captains. Hiri Saragaki, lieutenant of the 12th Division, snidely remarked. I'm talking about the fact that everyone is agreeing that something shitty is going on within the Shinigami ranks. Well, Hirin, you're not exactly wrong, but it's not as if this is the first time something like this has happened in the Shinigami ranks. Yachiru giggled while kicking her feet from where she was seated on Kenpaki's shoulders. Even if it hasn't been long since she and Kenpaki joined the Godai 13, it wasn't exactly hidden information that they were rebels every then and now in the Godai 13 among the minor nobles and ordinary Shinigami. Head Captain Yamamoto listened to everything they had to say and silently contemplated this. Personally, he wasn't worried. Having lived for over 2,000 years, no level or form of betrayal and rebellion was new to him again, but he never allowed that lazed mindset to show when it concerned the Shinigami and their duties. Let me ask you again, third seat Itachi, what do you want to do with your blade? Easy. As far as I'm concerned, everyone here might as well be the person or part of the group after me, and I'm not willing to trust any of them unless I can verify that they are not in any way compromised. Kiriko couldn't help but chuckle loudly when he heard what Itachi just said. With the few times he'd spent in the company of the youth, the things he'd gleaned from his character were interesting to say the least. But no. Captain Yoryuki. Yoryuki stepped forward to stand in front of Itachi with a grin on her face and her hands spread wide. So? What are we still waiting for? Go ahead and do your thing. She said, permitting Itachi to run his anti-illusion check on her, but first she turned to the head captain. You don't have a problem with this, right, head captain? Yamamoto only looked at the both of them and said nothing, his answer showing his neutral decision on this particular matter. So? Why are you still unmoving? She asked Itachi, who remained staring at her. And why exactly are you doing this? Itachi asked back, but Yoryuki's answer came very easily. Why else? To gain your trust back, of course. The two of them stared at each other, one sighing while the other just looked on with apparent interest. Under the intense gaze of over 40 high-leveled Shinigami, Itachi gave his sword a twirl before running two of his fingers over the white surface. The white surface turned red like the clouds on his black cloak, and Itachi, in one swift move, drove the red blade into Yoryuki's body. Instantly, Kirikou, Kisuke, Swaifon and Jinrei all had their blades to attack his neck, but their next actions were halted when Yoryuki held up her hands for them to stop. She's fine. Itachi said while having his eyes closed. It took a few seconds before he drew out his blade, and that was when they all saw that she wasn't injured in the slightest. In fact, if one looked closer they'd see that the blade was constantly glitching. She's clear. There's no trace of any lingering illusion in her mind. Itachi said. The three captains and Swaifon retracted their blades from Itachi's neck and looked at Yoryuki, who followed with a nod. Tensei, make sure that he is not taking advantage of their mind in the process. Start with the third seats. Yamamoto said, revealing his decisions and kicking the kid chief and his vice, Hachigen Ushita, into action. They constructed two kid spells, one around Itachi's sword and another around the head of the third seat Itachi was stabbing his blade into. Sheesh, that felt weird. Hope you didn't go round sniffing up my nasty thoughts. Jin asked with a smile, but Itachi said nothing in reply. It was easy to see how neither of them liked each other. In Jin's case, he was an oddball that rarely got along with anybody, while Itachi's reason was more of bias and Jin's irritating behavior. Itachi, I sensed something. It's a little warped, but it didn't escape me. Something is weird with that Aizen fellow. How so? Itachi continued without any change in his expression or glancing to look at who Tsukuyomi was talking about. First of all is his Ryutsu, it has a certain potency to it that isn't present in yours or any of the third seats and lieutenants. Is his Ryutsu the same as we found in that man's mind? No, his is different. But there's something about him and the way his Ryutsu feels that just doesn't resonate with his persona. Noted. I'll keep an eye on him from now on. It wasn't until Itachi got to the lieutenants, specifically Hiri, that he felt illusions present. And due to the active kid around him and Hiri, Tensei and Hachigen also picked it up as soon as his sword identified it. Seeing their glowing kid barrier and the serious look on Itachi's face, everyone watching knew something was up. Tensei looked at Yamamoto with a grave expression. Head captain, there's a foreign Ryutsu presence that is inside her mind. I don't think we would have ever been able to pick it up if not for third seat Itachi's sword's ability. What the hell? Hiri screamed, panic slowly bleeding into her voice. What do you mean there's something in my head? I'm not being controlled, I tell you. Calm down, Lieutenant Saragaki. We know you're not being controlled. But we also know you've been compromised. Hiri's face blanched upon hearing Tensei's word. Chapter 68, Chapter 67, Yamamoto's verdict. Obsessed with organization, obsessed with the clan, obsessed with ourselves. A worthless compulsion that enslaves us and limits our capabilities, leading us to fear what we don't understand. Itachi Uchiha. Degree. What do you mean I've been compromised? Say it again, you damned bastard. Hiri screamed and lunged at Tensei but was caught midair by Kisuke, who no longer had his usual sleepy expression on his face. Calm down, Hiri. You're not been convicted for any crimes. However, Kisuke touched the kid barrier and read the energy signals coming off from it. Someone has you under their control. That fact is undeniable. He afterwards turned to Itachi. What can you tell me from this, third seat Itachi? You're the expert on illusions here. Itachi looked at Kisuke and then at Hiri. What went through his mind wasn't hard to guess. Kisuke's face was rigid stone cold as he drew his sword and stepped into Itachi's space, nodding to Tensei to activate his kid. You give me your answer. It wasn't a request for an explanation but a demand for an answer. Kisuk was pissed, even now he could feel the suspicious stares from some of the Shinigami in the room. Kisuk, keep your Ryutsu under control. Tensei warned, sensing how pricked to attack the captain's Ryutsu was. This was also a special moment for Itachi to deeply feel how potent a bona fide captain's Ryutsu was, a bit overreaching but he considered Kisuk's level as the appropriate benchmark for a captain. When he sent his Ryutsu into Kisuk's mind, the first thing he felt was his Ryutsu being arrested by a thread-like sensation. It didn't let his budge one bit. No wonder he was among the first to see through my illusions back then. What an interesting Zanpakuto spirit. I thought so. Itachi hummed in acknowledgement. He could feel how potent the strength of Kisuk's Zanpakuto was. She's just like us in the sense that they have a very deep and mutual relationship. Captain Urahara, keep your Zanpakuto under control. Yamamoto's stern warning drew everyone's gaze to Kisuk's sheathed Zanpakuto that was releasing wisps of red malevolent Ryutsu. Relax, Benihime. He'll die before he can do anything untoward against us. Even with Kisuk coaxing it, the sword's Ryutsu rose up unrepentantly as if challenging Kisuk before going down after Kisuk's Ryutsu rose to suppress it. Turning to Itachi, Kisuk regarded humorlessly. She hates you. An interesting spirit indeed. Tsukuyomi remarked, only to give way to Amaterasu's suspicion-laced tone. You're being awfully intrigued by her, Tsukuyomi. And I don't remember you being this impressed with any of the thousands of Zanpakuto surrounding us on a daily basis. Itachi ignored the discussion between his Zanpakuto spirits, not understanding why they had to let him listen to it. Maybe, but I haven't seen such an intricately controlled manipulation of Ryutsu from a Zanpakuto spirit that can easily arrest Itachi's probing. She's dangerous is what I mean. Tsukuyomi replied as calmly as ever, meanwhile Itachi was halfway with piercing Kisuk with his sword. However, different from his experience with the third seats and some few lieutenants, instead of the normal smooth sailing, he appeared in a dark red space with strings and crooked noise. You. A raging cold voice said, but before Itachi could react to the danger, his right hand was gone and the rest of his body was sewn to the space around him. A woman in red robes and puppet-like arms loomed over him with a glare in her eyes. You're awfully calm with someone in such a state. How did you get in here? Itachi looked around calmly and noted that he was probably in Kisuk's Zanpakuto space, something that should otherwise be impossible especially given how Kisuk was. Itachi looked at his arm and frowned slightly at it. Under Benihim's slightly astonished gaze, the stump of the arm burst into black flames and burned away whatever was keeping him in place. Before she could lash out, two small spirits rose up from behind Itachi who turned to look at them, especially the small crow that perched on his shoulders. What is the meaning of this, Tsukuyomi? He asked Tsukuyomi because he too was ignorant of why he was inside Kisuk's Zanpakuto space, where he was the weakest he's ever been. I only responded in kind to her attack. Or do you consider that a lie, Benihime? Benihime snorted dismissively at Tsukuyomi's question and waved her hands toward Itachi, trying to capture him, but hissed menacingly when her hands touched his clothes. You uncouth woman! She snarled. Amaterasu's voice in reply to her came from Itachi's clothes. Keep your manipulating hands away from my charge, woman. Or the next thing that will be burned will be your host. Amaterasu's flames consumed Itachi and Tsukuyomi until they were gone from Benihim's space. Get stronger, Itachi! Was Amaterasu's curt remark after Itachi came back to himself before her presence disappeared. Third seat Itachi. Itachi knew why Amaterasu behaved like that, but there was little he could do right now, so he focused on what he might actually have the strength for. Well, you're clear. Itachi said dryly. But you don't look it, or rather you seem dissatisfied with it. Kisuk said, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Now tell me, how did Hiri fall under someone's illusion without me or her noticing? That is something I don't know, but I'm sure Hiri Saragaki is not the only one under this influence. I'd reckon Swa-Fon is too. What are you saying, Itachi Uchiha? Swa-Fon barely managed to let it out through gritted teeth. Oh, she was angry. Itachi showed no reaction to Swa-Fon's anger and replied while facing Kisuk. There's no way Swa-Fon would accept a mission, one she knows I never carry out, without express permission from Yoryuki. Captain Yoryuki, or something that leaves no doubt that Yoryuki sanctioned it. This is most probably a scheme to throw everyone off balance, and I'm the driving force for this part of their plan. In other words, someone is primed to take the fall in a way that leaves no doubt in anyone's mind. What are they banking on? My abilities? My perceived overconfidence? Or maybe the general ignorance of the higher-ups? Swa-Fon stepped forward, scowling at Itachi with a hateful gaze. I can't believe I once trusted you. She muttered under her breath for Itachi to hear. Your thoughts are flawed, Swa-Fon. Will it make you feel better if I glare and rage about the injustice I feel instead of being realistic? Or should I blindly trust you even after being an accomplice, willingly or not, to my attempted murder? Will that make it easier for you to understand, Swa-Fon? Without much fanfare, as just like he expected, Swa-Fon too was under such illusions. Apart from Swa-Fon, another lieutenant, Shun Kukaki, lieutenant of the 6th Division and son of its captain, Jinrei Kukaki, was found under the influence of an unknown Zanpakuto. Tensei, your evaluation. Everyone kept silent as Tensei adjusted his glasses to speak with a frustrated expression on his face. Head captain, to be frank, without Itachi's blade to point something like that out, it's practically impossible to find it out with Kid or any way I can think of. As far as I can tell, nothing like that existed until Third Seed Itachi plunged his blade into their bodies. Doesn't that mean he's the one practically putting it in there? I mean, there's coincidences and whatnot, but this is hella convenient if you ask me. Kensei Magurama smirked. If you'll allow me, head captain, this has gone too far and it's no longer funny. Kensei applied his shunpo and appeared behind Itachi with his hands lit with a restraining kid, however the moment his fingers pointed to Itachi to fire off the kid, Itachi blurred and the next thing he saw was his fingers pointing at himself and his kid restraining his own movements. Oya? Just how did you get in that position, Kensei? Shinji, along with a few captains, instantly reassessed Itachi's strength level with how effortlessly he subdued a captain. His illusion might have been in play but that didn't take away from the fact that he easily subdued a captain with his own kid. Itachi paid no attention to Kensei who forcefully broke out of his own Saibakud, and faced Yamamoto who was watching him with clear eyes under his squinted eyelids. Your decision. Head captain. Instead of answering Itachi, Yamamoto turned to Tensei and Kisuke and asked. I shouldn't be asking this as it is the same as questioning your capabilities, but we're far past that point. What can you say for certain? Itachi and Kisuke stared at each other, the tension between them clearly felt in the room. There's not much to say, but based on Itachi's sharp intuition in the past, his words should be heeded to a certain extent. Hiri's face blanched as she heard Kisuke's words that hit the nail on the head in regards to her compromised status. I'm not entirely sure, but I can say that Itachi's Ryutsu is entirely different from whatever it was that had its influence over these Shinigami. Tensei said. Yamamoto nodded and banged his cane on the ground. 2nd Division Captain, Yoryuki Shion, 6th Division Captain, Jinrei Kukaki, 12th Division Captain, Kisuke Urahara, Executive Militia, Swa-Fon, 6th Division Lieutenant, Shun Kukaki, 12th Division Lieutenant, Hiri Saragaki, you are henceforth temporarily suspended from your duties until the investigative procedures of the Kid Corps and on Mistookid have been carried out and the judgment of Central 46 has been passed. The air instantly chilled with Yamamoto's words, but the three captains called out paid little attention to it as their minds were on entirely different things. The same goes for you, 3rd Seed Itachi. Chapter 69, Chapter 68, Compliments and Choices. Loneliness is this world's worst kind of pain. Itachi Uchiha. Aizen and Jin walked together back to their division with a difficult face and a tempting smile on their respective faces. Are you becoming too lazy, Vice? They almost got you there. Jin said as they walked through the empty hallway leading to Aizen's office. They almost discovered your entire flair back there. He was trying to incite Aizen by dapping his bruised ego to make him talk in order to know his thoughts and the plan he'd laid out. Unfortunately for Jin, Aizen remained silent with his expression frozen to how it had been since they left the head captain's office. Stepping into Aizen's office, a barrier kid came alive and Jin looked questioningly at Aizen, still with a perpetual smile on his face. So you can tell when you're being followed, Jin. Aizen's voice came from behind a curtain in the other end of the room, where Aizen was walking to. Raising the flap of the curtain, Jin's smile was lost for a moment before coming back in full force as he gazed at Aizen, the real one, sitting on a chair and going about his lieutenant duties. As expected of you, Vice. So tell me, how did you know to set such a piece in place? Jin asked as he slithered to Aizen's side while the stand-in Aizen stood mute to the side. Cause I'll be real with ye, I was almost panicking when he pushed his blade into your body. It's body, I guess. Right. I'm sure you were. Aizen replied offhandedly as he looked up at Jin as his stand-in. At least, it accomplished its duties. He turned to Jin who was looking at him with what could be called a deceptively expectant smile. I did not count on the possibility that he could undo Kaika Suijutsu's illusion it existed, but I counted it as a rather minuscule chance. I'd say he subverted its influence rather than outrightly undoing it. Still, compliments where it is earned. He saw Jin still showing that unnerving smile of his and pointed at the clone of him that attended the captain's meeting. This, he stabbed his body double with his hands and watched as cracks appeared over its body before it disintegrated into Reishi, is a hollow eye modified to mask Kaika Suijutsu's Ryutsu in the event of something like this happening. Jin started snickering much to Aizen's displeasure and it got louder and louder until Aizen decided to keep quiet until he finished laughing. And pray tell, third seat Ichimaru Jin, what you find so amusing? Jin broke out into another snickering fit before composing himself and bowed his head in an overly gratificating manner. My dearest apologies, Lieutenant Aizen. You know, it's not a crime to admit when someone unknowingly slipped you up. Aizen immediately lost interest when he heard what Jin had to say. And here I thought it wasn't something this stupid. That aside, what were you thinking letting yourself be tailed? Jin shrugged nonchalantly. He's too good. I couldn't spot him at all and it was my instincts that told me I was being followed. And yet you question me for inadequacies. Aizen retorted. POV, with Itachi. Itachi, Swa-Fon, Hiri, and Shun were led to the back seats of the large theatre that was the courtroom of Central 46, away from the captains who were presenting their cases to the judicial panel. Itachi was tempted to use his Sharingan but his discipline wasn't that lacking that he couldn't do away with such thoughts and also any ability of any kind was strictly forbidden inside Central 46. The Central 46 was a group of 40 smart men and 6 judges gathered from all over the Soul Society that acted as the main ruling body of the Soul Society, not the 5 great noble houses, under the direct mandate of the Soul King and no one else's. They possessed the highest power judicial, legislative, and executive authority in all things concerning souls, Shinigami and hollows and their decisions were rarely overturned or taken back. Sitting back here and reviewing what he knew and the little he was recently told by Shun, a very kind man who despite his status was polite to everyone. Swa-Fon, who sat beside him, had all her attention on Yoryuki who was up on the podium and answering the questions asked. After all the captains presented their cases, the lieutenants involved were called and questioned extensively, with Itachi being asked to release his partial Shikai, both of them, and his true Shikai as well as his Sharingan and listing all his abilities and even showing them off. His Zanpakuto should be confiscated, at least until this matter has been resolved. We can't take any chances with something as delicate as this. One of the men, all hidden behind numbered plagues, said after minutes of silent contemplation. While his expression remained unchanged, unknown to all except 2 women, his thoughts however were hovering between 2 choices that depended on whatever the Central 46 decided. Even if the panel of Central 46 weren't fully composed of ex-nobles, Itachi's bias just didn't let him see a situation where men with such power would ever decide on something that favored him. Another one however objected to the first's words. I would agree but we have confirmation from all the Shinigami from captain rank to 3rd seat that it was his blade that managed to identify the illusions that were recently activated. That sent the panel into another round of murmuring and they once more discussed Itachi's case, their voices muffled to his ears. After some time, the murmuring ceased and it was now time for the 6 judges to pass their first verdict concerning Itachi in this case. 3rd seat, Itachi. After the first hearing everything went back to normal, at least on the surface, but the Onmistookid and Kid Core were hard at work. With the subtle inclusion of the noble houses, this was a very sensitive case for everyone involved. For Itachi, this meant something else. Unlike what most would think, this was the perfect chance for anyone chaotically inclined to push forward any plans they have. His movements were restricted quite a bit, due partly to suspicion and partly to the importance of his Shikai. Tachi, you're spacing out again. He was shook out of his thoughts by a bundle of pink that appeared out of nowhere. Are you bored? Kenny likes to fight when he's bored. Itachi shook his head and stood up with Yachiru hanging loosely off his shoulders. There's something I have to do, Yachiru. It would have been better if you could have gotten them to release their Shikai. I doubt the head captain will agree to such a request, especially one coming from someone as insignificant as me. Nuh-uh. Come on, Tachi. She pulled his face towards a specific direction and urged him on. Itachi absent-mindedly followed her while frolicking in his thoughts. He was going after whoever was after him. Hell to the restrictions placed on him. Slowly and steadily, he was creating spy points all over the Godai 13. All it would take is a little while and large amounts of effort, but he knew, surely he'd have a bird's eye on the Godai 13. I'm afraid I can't accompany you right now, Yachiru, he said as he nudged Yachiru, who threw a backflip off his shoulders. Since you're already here, why not stop for a while? They turned and saw Anohana flanked by other Shinigami from her division, with Itachi realizing where Yachiru had pulled him to. Ri-chan. Yachiru waved happily, while the Shinigami around Yoryuki stumbled to greet her. After all, she had a certain reputation in the 4th Division when it came to her status of being from the 11th Division, being its lieutenant, and being Zaraki Kenpaki's partner. Tachi, Katechin makes the best tea. Even better than yours. Anohana dismissed her subordinates and beckoned Itachi and Yachiru to follow her. You shouldn't bother yourself with receiving us, Captain Anohana. We are hardly important guests. Itachi said, but she just slowly shook her head. I wanted to have a conversation with you for some time now, Itachi. This is just a lucky chance since I have no pressing patients in my ward. She said. Itachi looked questioningly to her, wordlessly asking what it was that she might want to talk to him about, but she didn't reply and just led them to a room Itachi was familiar with in his few times being here. A soft interrogation perhaps. He thought inwardly, not fully trusting anyone in the 13 divisions, not that he ever did. So what is it that you wanted to talk about, Captain Anohana? He asked after sitting down and served tea by the comely captain. Anohana sat down and stared directly at Itachi, who hadn't touched his tea, a serious variation of her calm look expressed on her face as she began. Whatever it is that you might think regarding past or present situations, I'd rather you don't favor the choice of defecting or turning rogue like you plan to do. Itachi looked at her, then at the stunned Yachiru, and then back at her again, and sighing before putting his blades on the table and regarding her with the same look she was giving him. Chapter 70, Chapter 69, The Result of Pain. However strong you become, never seek to bear everything alone. If you do, failure is certain. Itachi Uchiha. Degree. Anohana spared a cursory glance at Itachi's swords on the small table between them and looked back at the youth. Are you surprised that I pointed that out? She asked as she picked up her cup to take a small sip. Itachi looked at Anohana with a calculative gaze, going over strings of thoughts and possible routes this particular conversation might take and what her reasons might be for bringing it up. If you want to ask why I said this or the reason for my assumptions, then I think it's fair to say that I'm familiar with such eyes, and given what little I know of your history, it really isn't hard to tell. Even if she didn't drop her blades like he did, he knew he wasn't under the danger of being attacked. He couldn't tell what it was, but there was something about Anohana that made it pretty clear to anyone facing her whether or not they were in danger. Why are you always calm? Rather than an answer or question of similar topics, Itachi asked this instead. She tilted her head slightly to the side, eyes widening just an imperceptible bit to show her surprise at the surprise question. Nothing seems to faze you. It's like you care too much, but at the same time you're overwhelmingly apathetic. Finally she picked up her sword and put it on the table in front of her. This was a rather aged practice of parley between two opposing bodies, a call of truce. When you've lived for as long as I have, seen what I've witnessed, and have done a fraction of the things I did, there are very little things that will faze you. You're rather young, you wouldn't understand. Maturity is not the increase of age but instead the accumulation of experiences, good and bad, and I can say that even souls as long-lived as you have never done some of the things I did. Itachi stretched his hands to pick up his cup, swirled it a bit while looking at the liquid inside, before taking a small drink. Anohana asked again as they started falling silent. Why do you want to defect? Itachi scrutinized her eyes, her breathing, and even the soft sway of her calm Ryutsu. Don't you care for the Godai 13? Itachi asked once more. I do. Anohana answered. This is my home, and if it ever comes to it, I wouldn't hesitate in cutting you down to protect it. Itachi nodded at the statement, fully understanding the sentiment as it was one he carried throughout his life. An enemy of the leaf was an enemy of Itachi Uchiha. You still have yet to answer me, Itachi. How can I dedicate the entirety of my soul to something I don't trust in? Anohana understood that it was a rhetoric, so she remained silent for Itachi to say his piece. A lost leaf cannot blossom on its own except when it is grafted into a new tree. True. In order to survive, it has to hold tightly onto the grafting tree. Anohana supplied, comprehending the essence of the analogy Itachi was using. But having its former branch plucked up because of thorns, even the lone leaf will entertain the hard choice of remaining cut off and withering to death if the new tree is overrun with thorns. Somewhere along their little back and forth, Yachiru had left them and went back to the 11th division, instinctively knowing whenever Kenpeki was looking around for her. Itachi ran his fingers over the sheath of his blades, inwardly pleased with how they hummed in resonance to his touch, even the angry Amaterasu. How sad! Anohana suddenly muttered. What is? How pain can scar this deep into someone's soul? She said softly, her eyes seemingly seeing the scars she mentioned. Pain, it turns soft as cotton the strongest people. What was the nature of the conversation they had begun with? Itachi had no idea, but he relaxed slightly into his crossed legs. He's had a few conversations with Kirikou about similar topics, but the man had a rather persistent distaste for sober talks. It is a necessary tool for growth. Except sometimes the growth we gain from the pain we receive is disproportionate, it makes it obsolete, driving one into a spiral of madness and tears that the only thing they could ever hope to use as a rescue rope is hatred, but even sometimes it too falls short of the pain. Itachi looked at his empty cup and made to drop it when Anohana pushed the pot of tea to him as well as her cup for a refill. Help yourself, and please if you don't mind. Itachi refilled their cups, both taking a sip, before he continued. You asked why I would defect, but I'll ask you this, who will turn a blind eye when the roof they seek shelter under catches on fire? Itachi took back his blades and fastened them to his hips, an action mirrored by Anohana, and drank the rest of his cup in one gulp and gently placed it on the table as he stood up to leave. I appreciate the conversation, he said as he turned to walk out. Anohana nodded. Likewise. Word of advice if you care to listen. Itachi stopped at the door but didn't turn around. The executive militia and the Onmistokid are in charge of tackling the thorns and have more power in their less restricted movement, or at least their commanders do. Do with that what you will. Disregarding her warmly accepting personality, Itachi couldn't understand why she was doing this. First the talk, and now this. Why are you doing this, Captain Anohana? He asked. Did the head captain put you up to this? Anohana chuckled and waved her hand in a hiding dismissal. Of course not. Let's just say that the Seirai would lose a competent and loyal Shinigami if you defected, and I'd rather not want that. Geniuses like you, one so scarred yet so whole, are very rare even when you're as long-lived as me. And I quite enjoy the philosophical conversations over tea. I would have understood you more if you'd been a manipulator. And you wouldn't have been this hard to read. Were Itachi's parting words as he left her office. And if you're interested you can ask Isane to help you with learning Kaide. She said to the empty room, but had no doubt that he heard it. World of the Living. Lisa led a group of Shinigami in training from the Shin Academy on a hollow extermination mission, happy for the break she seriously needed after the incident that implicated all the captains down to their third seat. Junpei, Miwa, Kin, and Iwu, it's a group of low-level hollows. Tatsufusa and I will be your group and the other groups and step in once we determine it is too dangerous for you. Lisa said and sent the 3 groups of 4 students towards 3 separate gatherings of weak hollows. She took a higher vantage point to get an unobstructed view of 2 of the groups while her third seat looked after the last one. Her mind went back to the meeting a week ago, specifically to Itachi and how stronger he'd gotten in such a short time, and couldn't help but curse. Fucking geniuses. She didn't need her glasses to know that Itachi could go against any captain, except the head captain of course, and wouldn't necessarily come short. Except maybe when they use their Bankai. She could follow Captain Kensei's movement, barely, but Itachi didn't look at the captain and restrained him in an instant. That, she could never. Lieutenant Lisa Yudmeru, I think we're done. She turned and saw Junpei and his group already back with their targeted hollows nowhere in sight. That was fast. She gave them an impressed nod and scrutinized them, mostly Junpei as he was the only third-year student among this group of fifth years, and he looked more roughed up than the others. Is it his Ryutsu? It's not as much as the others, but sensing it somehow creates an illusion of him being stronger than the others. Gah, I need to stop thinking about illusions. Junpei, are you sure you want to try graduating this year? She asked, not really understanding his reasoning. He took more beating from a normal scrub hollow than anyone else, she just didn't see him passing any of the exams. Junpei perked up at being called and nodded with resolute eyes. Yes, ma'am. I want to join the 2nd division. Now it wasn't only Lisa but also his group mates and returning students that stared at him. Any particular reason why the specialized 2nd division? Junpei nodded and the faintest trace of a smile almost broke across his lips. I need someone to tell me his name.
Thanks for listening.